Chapter 113, Formation Discs. You've beaten it to this, how can I eat it? Pu Yao said in dissatisfaction. Zhuo Mo panted, not having the energy to pay attention to him. After a while, his breaths evened. Thinking about the danger that had just passed, he suddenly erupted, "You damned Ren Yao. Why didn't you tell me before that Yin fiends could attack?" Pu Yao's face was matter-of-fact. "I thought you knew. Such a simple thing, you should know that." "Silly Yao, you aren't seeing the situation clearly." Zhuo Mo smirked, "Such a simple thing, Ji doesn't want to lower myself to do it. You can do it yourself." Finishing, he turned to leave. Pu Yao was dumbstruck. "Silly Yao. Fighting with Ji, I'll let you know how to die." Zhuo Mo raged inside, his anger remaining. "This is a misunderstanding." Pu Yao caught up and said solemnly, "Actually, I wanted to teach you how to deal with Yin fiends, but you know, this needs you to personally experience it so you have a better impression." Zhuo Mo didn't pay attention to him. Pu Yao glanced at him, and kept on speaking, "Look, with your power, it doesn't take much energy to destroy Yin fiends that have just formed. But do you have any way of injuring them but not destroying them?" Zhuo Mo didn't even blink an eyelid. "Why do I have to injure them but not destroy them?" Pu Yao said sternly, "Oh, it is not right to think that way. For example, your master told you to capture a Yao beast, alive. What will you do? You make medicine as well, and you should know that many Yao beast material need alive beasts to be effective." Zhuo Mo still didn't pay attention to him. "However, taking into account your present cultivation, it was pretty good that you managed to destroy it. But you cannot stay forever in Wukong Mountain and Sky Moon Jia. Oh, you still have to go find your identity in history." Zhuo Mo's steps stopped. He rudely interrupted Pu Yao. "Pu, what do you really want to say?" Pu shrugged his shoulders. "I just want to teach you some methods of dealing with similar situations." "What methods?" Zhuo Mo asked. "There are many." Pu Yao rubbed his chin, "But with your present power, the best methods is formations." "Formations?" Zhuo Mo first paused and then some interest rose. "Formations, how to use formations?" "The enemy will let me set up a formation." Smugness rose in Pu Yao's bloody pupil and then disappeared. "Your understanding of formations is still too shallow. I have seen strong Shuzhe. Their minds would just move and they could make a big formation. They have endless tricks. I once encountered a sword Shio. He had 12 flying swords, and he could set up a powerful formation in the blink of an eye, extremely strong." Zhuo Mo was slightly disappointed. "You're just wasting your words." Recently, he had been studying formations, but he had just started. He needed a lot of time to set up a slightly complex formation, much less using his mind to set up a large formation. "It seems your basic knowledge is too weak." Pu Yao was not gentle in mocking Zhuo Mo. He continued, "There is something called formation discs in this world." "Formation discs?" Zhuo Mo paused and then became joyous. "You know how to make formation discs." Many of the formation jade scrolls he had gathered would mention the thing called formation discs, but not one of the jade scrolls mentioned how to make formation discs. He had planned on searching in Dong Fu to see if he could buy a jade scroll about formation discs. However, after the incident with the inky black lotus seed occurred, he didn't have time to go search before he sneaked back to the mountain. "I don't have any interest in trash like formation discs." Pu Yao's words were like a bucket of cold water poured over his head. Zhuo Mo's heart that had just heated slightly instantly cooled down. He looked in extreme dissatisfaction at Pu Yao. Pu Yao shrugged, "Even though I don't understand, but I know where to find the instructions." "Where?" Zhuo Mo couldn't help but ask. "Oh, I feel we need to make an agreement," Pu Yao said slowly. Zhuo Mo first stilled and then understood what Pu Yao meant. He asked, "What agreement?" "I'll tell you where it is. You need to give me 50 Yin fiends, alive." Pu Yao's bright red tongue licked his lips, extremely alluring. Okay. Suemo agreed without any hesitations. Your sex records room has it. Pu Yao smirked at Suemo. Suemo was speechless. The records room of Wukong's sword sect was open to all inner sect disciples and did not require any contribution points. When the sect leader had announced this, Suemo had been suspicious that he had heard it wrong. He felt none of the elders were charitable people, so why would they announce such a strange rule? However, Suemo definitely approved of it. The only shortcoming was that the sect primarily focused on sword scriptures and had pitiful amounts of other jade scrolls. There were very few that were good ones. This was also why Suemo hadn't thought of the sect's records room in the first place. Suemo suddenly stopped in his steps. He saw a familiar figure. Luo Li Shixiang. Wasn't he in seclusion? Suemo was slightly surprised. He looked a few more times. Luo Li Shixiang seemed engrossed in his reading, and hadn't noticed his arrival at all. Suemo didn't have any good feelings for Luo Li Shixiang. The conflict between the two of them basically could not be resolved. Suemo didn't want to have a conflict happen in the records room, so he lightened his steps and started searching in the records room. He quickly found the jade scroll on formation discs and was overjoyed. Pu Yao hadn't lied to him. Holding the jade scroll, Suemo quickly sunk into the world of the jade scroll, completely forgetting the passage of time. Formation discs was putting already prepared formations inside a jade disc so that when it was needed, it could quickly be released. It was an extremely practical technique. The majority of formations could be made into formation discs for easy use. However, the power of formation discs was slightly weaker than the formations that were set up using talismans, so it was preferred by low-level Xiuzhe below Jindan. In all the Xiuzhe, the ones skilled in using formation discs were roaming Xiu. Suemo found that he seemed to be extremely similar to roaming Xiu. The spells that he had primarily focused on in the area of Ling farming were also one of the areas roaming Xiu were skilled in. The difficulty of creating formation discs was directly related to the difficulty of the formation. It had to be said that Suemo's days which he spent in Dong Fu processing all kinds of materials had given him large amounts of experience. Under his attentive studying, he gradually learned how to make formation discs. Before this, he studied formations because he wanted to increase his skill at forging and danmaking. He had never thought about using formations against enemies. Only when he started learning how to make formation discs did he find that formations could be used against enemies. When he left the records room, the sky was already dark. Luo Li Shixiang had disappeared. Suemo guessed that he had left. Returning to the little west wind yard, Xiaogua had already left. Only Silly Bird was standing on the rooftop, untiringly preening her own feathers again and again. Finding a jade board in the room, Suemo gathered his mind to think and started to create his first formation disc. He cut out a piece of jade that was palm-sized and the thickness of a finger. There was no need to wonder about the shape of the formation disc. Suemo used the water drop sword to cut it into a rough circular shape. The important part was to seal the formation into the jade disc. What formation should he seal? Since it was his first try, Suemo decided to pick a formation of little difficulty, 3-talent water formation. The only purpose of this formation was to greatly increase the water content inside a certain area to increase the power of water element spells. There were many things that had to be taken care of when setting up a formation, and the most important one of them was the formation talisman. The formation talisman was just a talisman that could act as the intermediary for the formation. Some Xiuzhe would create some little flags and use them to make the formation. Others would make a beaded bracelet for the formation. The Xiuzhe were different, and the formation talismans that could be used were endless and varied. However, if they were formation talismans, they would have some similarities, such as number. The more powerful the formation, the more complex it usually was, and the more formation talismans was needed to create the formation. However, to Suemo, formation talismans was something he could only dream about. He didn't have the power presently to create a good formation talisman. Thankfully, the 3-talent water formation did not need any good materials. Zuemo just randomly found 3 pieces of first-grade greenwood, cut it up to half a cun wide, and 3 cun long pieces, before starting to carve the formation on them. Due to the formation itself being simple, 3 crude formation talismans were quickly completed. Zuemo started to set up the 3-talent water formation. The 3 pieces of greenwood were placed in the positions of sky, earth, and person. 2 jingshi were placed according to the positions of sun and moon. After setting it up, Zuemo started a spell. A layer of misty water quickly covered the little west wind yard. Silly bird shrieked in shock from the roof, and hurriedly flapped her wings to fly into the sky. At this time, Zuemo had taken out the jade disc he had prepared before, and cast a spell to seal the formation. All the water and the 3-talent water formation were completely taken into the jade disc. There was nothing left on the ground, and on the jade disc, there was a green water-shaped sigil. Zuemo found it extremely interesting. He quickly cast a spell for the formation disc. Light flashed across the surface of the formation disc, and a 3-talent water formation appeared on the ground again, continuously producing water. However, the rate of water that it produced in the air was slightly slower than before. So interesting. Zuemo, interested, started to make all kinds of formation discs. Even though it was the simplest materials, but he was extremely interested and toyed around gleefully. He only stopped when all the Ling power in his body was used up. He had about a dozen of all kinds of formation discs. Extremely exhausted, he collapsed into sleep. Moments later, his snores were like thunder. Zuemo was called up by Xiaoguo. Xixiang. Xiaoguo timidly called. Zuemo barely managed to open his eyes and muttered indistinctly. It had been a time since he had such a good sleep. Sect leader tells you to go to Wukong Hall. Wukong Hall, don't bother me. Just having opened his eyes, Zuemo's mind was still fuzzy. After a while, his mind focused and he instantly sat up, nervously asking Xiaoguo, "Where did you just say sect leader wanted me to go?" "Sect leader said for you to go to Wukong Hall," Xiaoguo timidly said. Without another word, he jumped up, and rushed out of the West Wind Valley like a burst of wind. She was joking. If sect leader said for him to go to Wukong Hall, then that definitely meant he had something important to announce. On the way there, he kept on pondering what important matter did the sect leader have to announce this time. Chapter 114, Sword Test Conference. When Zuemo hurried to Wukong Hall, he was surprised to find Luo Li Shixiang was also there. He bowed to the sect leader seated at the front before standing to one side. Scanning the surroundings, he saw the other Shibua and master had not come. There was only the 3 of them in Wukong Hall. Luo Li, Zuemo, you 2 need to prepare. 1 month later, you and your Wei Xing Shixiang will represent our sect at Dongfu Sword Test Conference. You have to cultivate well, and not slack off. The sect leader concisely announced this news. The status of Wei Xing as eldest Shixiang had become unshakable after he came out of the sword cave. Supposedly, the sect leader had announced it on the spot. Luo Li did not say a word, just bowed. Zuemo, who did not have any mental preparations, was dumb on his spot. Sword Test Conference. He was going to attend the Sword Test Conference. After a while, he regained his focus and said, panicked, "Sect leader, isn't this a bit inappropriate?" "How is it inappropriate?" Pei Yuanran hadn't thought that Zuemo would say it was inappropriate. Seeing the sect leader's gaze land on him, Zuemo could only keep going. This disciple might not be able to take the duty. It is enough for our sect to have Wei Xing Shixiang and Luo Li Shixiang. This disciple's power is weak. Before he even finished, even Luo Li's eyes as they looked at him were slightly strange. Pei Yuanran chuckled, "Haha. You don't look anything like your scalping zombie nickname. He narrowed his eyes slightly, and said warmly, the reputation of the sect, when it's time to use it, it should naturally be used well. However, when the sect needs your service, you cannot retreat. Zhuo Mo's heart dropped. It was over. The sect leader definitely knew that he had gone to Ling Ying's sect. The sect leader's warm gaze right now was like a knife. Zhuo Mo felt extremely uncomfortable, the words that had reached his mouth shrinking back. He hurriedly said, yes, yes, yes. This disciple was muddle-minded. To earn honor for the sect, it is the duty of our generation. This disciple will extinguish volcanoes and upset seas if necessary. The sect leader laughed, we don't need you to go through anything. Just try at the competition. It will be good for you personally. Zhuo Mo instantly was embarrassed. It was lucky that there was no expression on his face and nothing could be seen. The reason that he didn't want to attend the sword test conference was that he didn't want to divide his attention. He suddenly asked curiously, sect leader, hasn't the sword test conference been going on for a while? Disciple had thought it was going to finish soon. Haha, the local sects would always have a few slots. You can directly attend the sword test conference, and do not have to start from the preliminary sword test conference. Alright, if you have any more questions, you can ask your Liying Feng Shiji. I have put her in charge of the logistics for this conference. Pei Yuanran waved his hands, signaling for the two to leave. From beginning to end, Luo Li did not say a word, standing there like a block of wood. Zhuo Mo didn't exchange pleasantries with him and they left on their own paths. Walking to the West Wind Valley, Zhuo Mo still hadn't managed to react yet. He had never thought about attending the sword test conference. Even though he was tempted of the prizes, but he knew how much he was really worth. He had heard things when he had been processing materials in Dongfu. Supposedly, this sword test conference was the biggest Sky Moon Jia ever held, and had the highest attendance in history. He might have been bold and victorious at Ling Ying's sect, and gotten a lot of gains, but there was a lot of luck involved. In the many young disciples of Sky Moon Jia, the first-class ones were those young people who had already reached the stage of Ningmai, like Wei Xingxixiao. Ningmai was like a doorway. If they could not step over it before 30 years old, they wouldn't make any great achievements. Zhuo Mo was full of confidence in Wei Xingxixiao, but placed in the context of the entire Sky Moon Jia, this confidence would have to discount it. Dongfu was just one of the 13 primary towns of Sky Moon Jia, and there were countless families of various sizes spread out across the wild. In Sky Moon Jia, other sects of various sizes, the next numerous group were all kinds of families. These families had generations of cultivators, and there were not many differences compared to sects, except that they were even more traditional and conservative. They did not accept Xiuzhe from the outside. Compared to sects, the resources that the families had were much less, and they were less scriptures and spells. However, they had their own method of surviving. They might not have many spells, but after being refined and corrected by generations of disciples, as long as it had managed to pass down, it would have its unique traits. The disciples that came from sects, they would have stronger foundations in areas. The disciples that came from families, they would always have one or two spectacular spells. Each had their specialties. If a talented disciple came out of a cultivation family, the tilt in the resources would be even greater than a sect. So many powerful experts, he, with his Juji cultivation, what would he do there? Zhuo Mo twisted his mouth. In reality, even Luo Li Shixiang didn't have a hope in his eyes. If someone had a chance from the sect, it would only be Wei Xingxixiang. When he thought of Wei Xingxixiang, Zhuo Mo couldn't help but feel expectant. Xixiang, who had killed his way step by step in the cave, and broken through to the stage of Ningmai, what kind of display would he put up? This was the only part of the sword test conference that Zhuo Mo was interested in. The Yin fiends in the sword cave had all been wiped out by Xixiang. Even, Pu Yao, when speak of Xixiang, would occasionally show hints of praise. Okay, since he was just going there to show his face, Mo decided, of course, he would display his effort to avoid being punished by the sect leader. Mo then decided to throw the problem to one side and keep doing what he was doing. In the little yard, Xiaoguo was still practicing the sword, sweating heavily, extremely focused. Mo did not disturb her, only standing and looking silently from the side. After a short while, he nodded. Xiaoguo had improved very quickly, and the blue flower, sword scripture had formed. In reality, Xiaoguo's talents in the sword could only count as average. Mo had only taught her to fulfill the duty of a Shixiang. But as Xiaoguo continuously improved, especially the effort that almost surpassed Mo's imagination, his attitude started to gradually change and he taught more seriously. Blue flower, sword scripture, killing intent hidden within the gentleness. The navy sword light was sometimes thin and dense, layers of circles like the fine brush paintings, sometimes the sword leapt like the crazed ink writing. Presently, Xiaoguo's blue flower still lacked killing intent, but on soft, and entangling, it was exceptional. What Mo felt astounded by was the tenacity that was barely perceivable in her sword presence. She was like a timid and silent spider hiding in the white porcelain vase, spitting out countless thin navy strands, quietly forming a dense and strong blue net, trapping her opponent. This blue flower was really suited for her. Mo praised inside and felt happy for her. In the future, Xiaoguo definitely could become a pretty strong sword xiu. There was another transformation in blue flower, drawing essence. Mo felt that he couldn't demand so much. This thing was related to one's personality. Xiaoguo wasn't that kind of forthright and lively person. He guessed it would be hard for her to comprehend that level of sword essence. Mo wasn't a person stuck on transformations. He felt that if Xiaoguo kept developing like this, she would definitely carve out a road for herself. Thinking about it, Mo gathered all the jade scrolls that he felt could give Xiaoguo help. Most of them were and soft sword scriptures. At this time, Xiaoguo had completed one round of practice. When she raised her head and saw Mo watching on from the side, she timidly said, "Shixiang, oh." Mo responded. He took out a few jade scrolls out of his 100 treasures pouch to give to Xiaoguo. "Take this and have a look. Don't just practice, take a look at other things, learn some knowledge, it can be inspiration for you." Seeing mist rise in Xiaoguo's eyes, Mo instantly had a headache. He hurriedly stuffed the jade scrolls into Xiaoguo's hands, and said in a deliberately stern tone, "This is homework. I will inspect it. Don't slack off. Keep practicing." Finishing, he fled, heading towards his house. Everything about this little girl was good, except she liked crying too much. Mo shook his head. He could do nothing for Xiaoguo there. Oh, she can practice by herself since she had been pretty good right now. Mo said extremely irresponsibly. He quickly threw the question to one side, and started his daily cultivation. His cultivation was extremely unequal right now. The great majority of his time was on scriptures. Both, embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, and, Vajra profound sutra, needed large amounts of time. In comparison, the time he spent on spells was lamentable. Due to not having the next section on the 5-element spells of Ling plant farmers, he could only work on the finger motions to stop them from becoming unfamiliar. Li Water Sword Scripture, after he merged the sword essences, he found that he had greatly diverged from the contents of the Jade Scrolls. The content in the Jade Scrolls was not suited to the newly hybrid sword essence. The problem was while it was hard to merge together the sword essences, it was even harder to split them apart again. The only thing Mo felt happy about was the new sword essence was much more powerful than before. The remaining time was on the spells for dan-making and forging. Shi Feng Rong felt that she didn't have time to teach him dan-making, so she let him read all the Jade Scrolls relating to dan-making. She had even wiped away the jinji on the jade scrolls that required an appropriate cultivation for Zuemo to read. It had to be said that this was very beneficial for Zuemo. His control over the stalagmite fire was much stronger than before. He could comprehend many of the intricacies. Even though he could not understand many parts due to his cultivation, but his thinking and knowledge was far above the past. In the area of forging, he could only be considered to be dabbling. The only thing he was good at was processing materials. Other things, he was extremely weak. However, he felt that forging was a pretty good direction, especially when he had a fire seed. When he had free time, he would flip through Second Sherbua's jade scrolls on forging. From this, it could be seen just how little spells he had. However, he didn't have any better methods. He definitely couldn't talk about it with sect leader and the Sherbua, otherwise, he would be lectured. The elders would certainly sternly lecture him to practice the sword, and not bite off more than he can chew. One sword breaks all moves was the confidence of sword shio experts. It was a pity that Zuemo was not an expert and did not have much time recently to put on the sword. He was a pure pragmatist. His development was completely due to needs and motivations. After he had nearly tripped up at Lingying's sect, he had become highly alert that he could not do it again. Earning Jingshi, it was better to be safe and steady. Before, he had spent large amounts of time on formations, but since he had been lacking for effective methods, he had studied, but didn't have great interest. But now that he had the formation discs, this had undoubtedly opened a window for Zuemo. On the other side of the window was a completely new world. Chapter 115, Exploring the Sword Cave. Again Zuemo opened his eyes, the dark gold covering his entire body slowly fading. If one was to peel away Zuemo's skin, they would see that the flesh under the skin would appear have countless slivers of gold embedded in it. The third level of Vajra Profound Sutra, Golden Clothing of Flesh, became deeper each day. The Mo matrix seemed to have the greatest pairing with Vajra Profound Sutra. Even Zuemo was shocked at the progression speed of Vajra Profound Sutra. Originally, he had assumed that the gravestone version of Vajra Profound Sutra would be slow and steady. Who knew that with the addition of a Mo matrix, it dramatically transformed. Based on this speed, he would soon reach the fourth level of Red Lotus Flowing Gold. It was a pity that other than body cultivation, Zuemo didn't know how to use it. Even though his body was golden clothing of flesh and was not easily injured by normal flying sword. But the sorry state he was in when he had encountered the Yin fiends last time made him understand that even though his body could not be destroyed, he could do nothing against spiritual attacks. Zuemo felt he was a complete tragedy. He had a gigantic consciousness but didn't know how to use it. He had cultivated his body to golden clothing of flesh, but similarly, he didn't know how to use it. He knew the attributes of countless materials, but could not forge an acceptable talisman. The only thing he felt fortunate about was that he knew how to make formations discs now. He could now use the formations he had learned. Pu Yao, who had become impatient long ago, nagged, "Start working. Start working." He didn't wait for Zuemo to speak up. Throwing out the Jingshi, a blur of light, and one person and one Yao disappeared from their spots. "We agreed. 50 seriously injured Yin fiends," Pu Yao emphasized, "alive." I know, Zuemo was extremely conscious that he had to pay what he owed. Even more, he owed Pu Yao. It wasn't easy to take advantage of Pu Yao. These past few days, he had made large amounts of all kinds of formation discs and wanted to try their abilities. "There's one there," Pu Yao instantly became excited as he floated towards one corner. Zuemo followed in a hurry. As expected, a Yin fiend was silently floating in the corner. Zuemo noticed the mist around the body of this Yin fiend was denser than last time. "What's this? It looks harder to deal with than last time," he asked Pu Yao. Pu Yao stared fixedly at this Yin fiend with his eyes bright. The only thing lacking was him drooling. Without turning his head he said, what place is this? The Yin fiends absorbed Yin energy every day. It's natural that they grow quickly. Suemo muttered and responded, so that was why. This Yin fiend was stronger than the last one. It quickly found Suemo, gave a dissonant sound, and then leapt at Suemo. At the same time a consciousness stab came. However, Suemo was prepared the time. With a snicker he flipped his hand, and he lightly threw out a formation disc. The formation disc was like it was thrown into the water. The air vibrated and the formation disc disappeared. The air next to Suemo's ears shook. The consciousness stab brushed past him. His heart was joyful. The formation was already effective. The Yin fiend that had traveled not far away from Suemo suddenly stopped in its place, seemingly confused. Due to desiring to see the effect of the formation, Suemo wasn't in a hurry to attack and circled around the Yin fiend. The Yin fiend inside the formation didn't respond at all, and was just turning in circles. As expected, joy could barely be disguised in Suemo's eyes. I hadn't guessed wrong. Pu Yao had told him the requirements for Yin fiends to form. Adding on the attack of the consciousness stabs that the Yin fiend had used last time, Suemo had deduced that Yin fiends were vulnerable to illusory formations. Yin fiends were born from Yin energies. Even though they knew how to use consciousness stabs, however their intelligence was low and were easily prey to illusory formations. The formation he threw out was called Path Confusion Formation. It was one of the simplest illusory formations. Its effect was to make others lose track of their position. Due to the limited materials, Suemo was not able to create a more complex path confusion formation. In real battles, a second-grade path confusion formation wouldn't be very effective. It basically was not effective against any Shouja above the stage of Juji. Even more so, the path confusion formation released by the formation disc was less powerful. However, this little and mostly useless path confusion formation successfully trapped a Yin fiend. In an instant, Suemo's heart was filled with the feeling of accomplishment. After Pu Yao had said that if he could not increase the storage of Ling power, then he should decrease the use of Ling power to increase the efficiency of Ling power, it had given him great inspiration. What he understood and was skilled at were all low-level spells. Right now, the improvement in his cultivation was extremely slow, and those high-level spells and formations all had high demands on Ling power. He had been disappointed for a long time, but the Mo matrix and Yao seed could not be removed. He could not solve the problem of storing Ling power, that meant he was destined to work with only low-level spells. Without any other method, he could only rely on these low-level spells and formations. He had a feeling, if he could use them well, low-level spells and formations could also release a significant power. Reality proved that he was correct. As long as the direction was right, a second-grade formation could trap a Yin fiend. It was great motivation that he had been right. This caused him to completely forget Pu Yao. All of his attention was on the trapped Yin fiend. He wanted to see how long this path confusion formation that was not even second grade could trap this Yin fiend. This Yin fiend, what counterattack would it have? Seeing Suemo not moving, Pu Yao was slightly dissatisfied, but he suppressed it. He also wanted to see what Suemo wanted to do. The Yin fiend inside the formation gradually became irritable. It could be seen from the boiling Yin energy around it. From the time it had been trapped, the Yin fiend had released 5 consciousness stabs, all of them failing to hit anything, and in all directions. This was evidence that the Yin fiend had completely lost its sense of direction. Squeak! The Yin fiend suddenly gave an extremely piercing yell, and from the restless Yin energy, there were 5 gray thin splinters that suddenly shot out. Bam! A light sound, and the path confusion formation instantly broke. The 5 gray splinters were not hampered and continued to travel in their path. Suemo's expression changed slightly. One of the gray splinters was shooting towards him. Hurriedly casting a spell, the Moonwater Black Turtle Armor's formation started up. A semi-clear turtle shell shield appeared in front of him. Pew! The turtle shield shook, the light fading, but it managed to stop it. Zhuo was shocked. This gray splinter was this powerful. He was extremely clear just how strong the turtle shell defense that the Moonwater Black Turtle armor put out. It had almost been broken. If that had landed on his body, it definitely would have left a bloody hole. Gritting his teeth, another formation disc appeared on his hand, Dragon Tying Formation. When the formation disc left his hand, it turned to 3 thin blue chains, and headed for the Yin Fiend. The 5 gray splinters seemed to have been harmful to the Yin Fiend as well. It was drooping at its spot, unable to dodge in time. The 3 blue chains were like 3 blue snakes, securely tying it up. Speaking of it, it was strange. This Yin Fiend was completely made up of Yin energy, but these blue chains could tie it like it was tangible, tying it so that it could not move. Only now did Zhuo release a breath. This, Dragon Tying Formation, was one of the fine formations in the Jade Scrolls that he had earned. To make this Dragon Tying Formation, he had used up a lot of materials. This was one of the biggest insurances he had this time. He hadn't thought he would use it so early. Do you need me to help? Zhuo calmed down and turned to ask Pu Yao. No need, Pu Yao licked the corner of his mouth and walked towards the Yin Fiend that was tied up. The Yin Fiend seemed to be extremely terrified of Pu Yao, furiously squeaking. Pu Yao was not moved. Walking in front of the Yin Fiend, he reached with his hand into the Yin energy. There didn't seem to be any movement, but the squeaks of the Yin Fiend gradually became smaller. The grey Yin energy covering the body of the Yin Fiend was sucked into Pu Yao's palm at a speed visible to the naked eye. Pu Yao revealed an intoxicated expression, so long since I tasted something this delicious. In the blink of an eye, he had sucked the Yin Fiend dry. The 3 blue chains vanished into the air without a support. Oh, there's still 49 more. There seemed to be a new glow on Pu Yao's face, the smile at the corner of his mouth even more enchanting. Luckily, Zhuo had prepared large amounts of formation discs for this trip to the Sword Cave. The Dragon Tying Formation was just one of them. Gradually, Zhuo became familiar with the specialties of the Yin Fiends. The Grey Splinters was the last life-saving move of the Yin Fiends. After they used it, they would shrink and become weak. The illusory formations were 100% successful against the Yin Fiends. Zhuo had to sigh that it was wondrous how things in the world would have their weaknesses. As Zhuo became familiar with the Yin Fiends, his moves became much more skilled. He spent more time now examining how the Yin Fiends used the consciousness. Yin Fiends were extremely primitive and crude in their use of consciousness, but to Zhuo who didn't know how to use his consciousness at all, it was an extremely valuable experience. When he encountered the 10th Yin Fiend, Zhuo could form a consciousness stab after trying a few times to condense the Yin energy into needles. Zhuo could skillfully use it after practicing a few times, but he was not very satisfied with the power. This move could be used as an ambush, but if the other person was prepared, it basically didn't have any use. The first time, Zhuo had been unprepared and that had caused his sorry state. Pu Yao expressed his usual disdain and mockery. Zhuo then put his attention on the grey splinters the Yin Fiends released because he found the grey splinters were much stronger than the consciousness stab. Every time, he would push the Yin Fiend to the limit to get the Yin Fiend to release the grey splinter for him to inspect. His consciousness was much stronger and larger than the Yin Fiend. After repeated inspections, he finally understood the gist. The center of the grey splinter was consciousness, and the outer layer was a dense skin of Yin energy. The grey splinter was much more skilled than the consciousness stab. It would use less spiritual power than the consciousness stab, but the consciousness stab couldn't compare to it in power. Pu Yao's mood was extremely good. He had ate more than 10 Yin Fiends in a row. There was an additional glow on his face, even the red pupil and the red crystal on his ears became bright and luminous. In opposition to Pu Yao, Zhuo's mood was terrible. He spent so much effort to understand what the gray splinter was, but he could not use it. Was there anything that would make someone more depressed? He felt it was not very hard to control his consciousness, but he wasn't a yin fiend. Where would he get such dense and pure yin energy? The gray splinters must include yin energy for them to be used. Without the available materials, without yin energy, Zhua Mo couldn't do it. Wait! Zhua Mo, who had been following with his head down beside Pu Yao, suddenly felt a light flash across his mind. His feet couldn't help but stop. Floating at the front, Pu Yao was slightly surprised. He also stopped and looked back in slight puzzlement. He coincidentally saw Zhua Mo's raised eyes, and the glee that could not be disguised. Chapter 116, Yin Splinters. Zhua Mo thought of the yin beads. Aren't the yin beads made of yin energy? The yin energy in the yin beads was even more condensed than the yin energy of the yin fiends. Zhua Mo became more excited the more he thought about it. He took out a yin bead and started to study it. Consciousness was extremely sensitive to other consciousness. When Zhua Mo inspected it before, he had clearly understood the consciousness inside the gray yin splinter. However, the yin bead was different than the yin energy surrounding the yin fiend. The condensation of the yin energy in the yin bead far surpassed the yin energy surrounding the yin fiend. He still needed to slowly figure out how to use his consciousness. He referred to this gray splinter as yin splinter. Zhua Mo sunk into his thoughts. He wasn't afraid of finding things out. What he was afraid of was not finding a direction. Now that he found a direction, he was halfway there. Pu Yao curiously looked at Zhua Mo thoughtfully as he silently floated forward. Zhua Mo unconsciously followed him. Zhua Mo didn't notice that the road under his feet was heading down. A dark smile came onto the corner of Pu Yao's mouth. Squeak! Zhua Mo was suddenly shaken and was frightened out of his thoughts. He raised his head and saw a yin fiend heading towards him. He was familiar with the routine and did not panic. He threw out a formation disc with path confusion formation inscribed in it. It was easy to make a path confusion formation, and it didn't need much in terms of quality of the materials. So Zhua Mo had made more of them than anything else. The 100 treasure pouch at his waist was extremely heavy, completely filled with all kinds of low-level formation discs. If it wasn't that his Vajra Profound Sutra had reached the level of golden flesh clothing, and his strength had improved, just the formation discs would be enough to crush him. As expected, the yin fiend stopped in its steps. But quickly, the yin fiend surprised Zhua Mo greatly. The yin energy surrounding the yin fiend moved restlessly and 3 gray yin splinters suddenly shot into the surroundings. The path confusion formation that had just formed was like a wet piece of paper and was torn to pieces. Only now did Zhua Mo notice the yin energy surrounding this yin fiend was thicker than the previous yin fiends. As the yin energy was extremely condensed, the gray yin energy looked black. Damn it! This yin fiend wasn't a normal one. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that Pu Yao had retreated to one side, a smirk on his face. Zhua Mo didn't have to think to know that it was Pu Yao's fault. But there was no time to think about it now. After this yin fiend shot out 3 yin splinters, it actually was not affected. It was completely immune to the weakening that the other yin fiends had when they shot out yin splinters. Zhua Mo couldn't help but have a bad feeling. There was only things like path confusion formations left in the 100 treasures pouch. He had completely used up the good formation discs like the dragon tying formation. Responding panically, Zhua Mo barely managed to dodge the yin fiend. The cold wind stirred by the yin fiend brushing past made his hair stand on end. Before he could distance himself, shoo shoo shoo, 3 yin splinters suddenly shot out of the yin fiend. Too close. Unable to dodge in time, Zhua Mo could only start up the turtle shell shield of the moonwater black turtle armor. Pew! The hard turtle shield was like a fragile bubble, dying at the same time as one of the Een splinters. The other two Een splinters directly headed for his face and vital areas. Zhuo Mo's soul fled. At the time of life and death, he focused all his attention, all his Ling power was channeled, all of his consciousness was furiously moving. He didn't have the time to summon his flying sword. Didn't have the time to take out the seal soldier. Didn't have the time to take out the Een fire bead. Right now, was only one thing he could use, Vajra Profound Sutra. Hi! Zhuo Mo shouted. Golden light flashed across his entire body and then suddenly dimmed. The light came fast and left even faster, as though it flashed by. After the golden light, Zhuo Mo's entire body seemed to be made from dark gold. His eyes were widened angrily, but there was no expression on his face. He seemed like the Vajrapani coming down to the earth, angry yet indifferent. Without any attention to spare, Zhuo Mo reached out with his two dark gold palms, swiping at the two Een splinters. What one would find strange was that his hands moved extremely slowly, but a feeling of pressure formed. The formation on the vambraces, 1000 kadi. At the same time, the third-grade wind travel boots silently glowed. Zhuo Mo's hands caught the Een splinters. Slap slap. Two clear explosions. The Een splinters seemed to have been hammered, exploding into Een energy, and spreading out. Zhuo Mo didn't end up well either, his hands trembling, his fingers in heart-rending pain. The Vajra Profound Sutra, in his body almost collapsed, but he knew this was not the time to take a break and gritted his teeth to persist. The third-grade wind travel boots lit up. Wind travel, and movement, both started. Zhuo Mo was like a ghost. After a string of turns, he distanced himself from the Een fiend. Panting heavily, Zhuo Mo stared fixedly at the Een fiend in front of him. The dangerous changes that had just occurred frightened him. He didn't even know how he managed to get through it. His heart was beating hard like a heavy drum. He had been too nervous before, and there hadn't been time for him to be afraid. Now that he had the attention to spare, he had enormous fear, and terror once again took over his body. Such a strong Een fiend. The Een fiend seemed to have detected Zhuo Mo's power. This time, it didn't charge at him, and maintained the standoff with Zhuo Mo. The Een energy that had been moving around its body stopped, motionless. Zhuo Mo didn't dare to slack off now. The Een fiend in front of his eyes was like a fully drawn bow. Just the slightest bit of outside force would cause it to attack. Zhuo Mo's hand touched the water drop sword, the terror inside instantly decreasing by a lot. His heart slowly resumed calm. He suddenly understood a little bit the meaning of the flying sword for sword shio. However, this was not the time to think about those things. He needed to first kill of this damned Een fiend in front of him. With his flying sword in hand, Zhuo Mo's confidence instantly rose. He didn't hesitate, and didn't hold anything back as he attacked. 7 whirlpools. 7 whirlpools was made up of countless sword energies and securely surrounded the Een fiend. The cold energy brimming as the sword energies crisscrossed. The Een fiend that had been preparing started its attack. Inside the Een energy it had condensed, a circle of Een splinters shot out at the surroundings with it at the center like a gray flower blooming. The Een splinters and 7 whirlpools smashed into each other. Bam bam bam. A string of explosions sounded like fireworks lit up, ringing in the ears. The 7 sword energies whirlpools were destroyed in an instant, but after the whirlpools that had been made up of those sword energy was torn apart, the power actually increased instead. After the 7 sword energy whirlpools broke, the area that they surrounded instantly turned into a mess, extremely disordered and chaotic. In the chaos, countless pieces made out of sword energies flew up and down like countless blades, furiously cutting and slicing. The pitiful Een fiend was in the center of the chaos and instantly was cut by the countless sword energies. Zhuo Mo was joyful. He hadn't thought that 7 whirlpools would increase in power after being broken. The Yin energy around this Yin fiend was extremely dense, and the wounds inflicted by the sword energies were more serious. Looking at the Yin fiends struggling in the disorder, Zhuomo's heart relaxed slightly. Only now was he at an advantage. This Yin fiend was really strong. The Yin fiend that he had destroyed with one sword blow and the Yin fiend in front of him now was not on the same level. Suddenly, the Yin fiend gave a piercing yell. The Yin energy surrounding its body suddenly shrunk inward and started to gather. Zhuo was shocked. The power of the chaos had started to falter. Even those broken sword energies had lost their sharpness. The Yin energy surrounding the Yin fiend shrunk, its body becoming even more concentrated. The sword energies, when they sliced it, gave cracking sounds as though they were cutting leather. It knew a move like this. Zhuo was dumbstruck at the endless moves this Yin fiend had. He couldn't help but think it was bad. Even though he didn't know what the Yin fiend would do next, he decided to attack first using another, 7 whirlpools. 7 sword energy whirlpools once again appeared surrounding the Yin fiend. The fragments of sword energy that had lost power were instantly sucked in by the 7 whirlpools. The 7 whirlpools instantly grew to twice its size. Under the high speed of revolution, the hissing became even more clear, shocking to the soul. Between the 7 whirlpools, the Yin fiend was still compressing Yin energy, not paying attention to anything else. At this time, its body was the size of a bamboo basket, entirely gray-black like a soft ball of ink. Zhuo gritted his teeth and forcefully revered his Ling force. Break! Boom! 7 gigantic whirlpools simultaneously exploded, countless pieces of sword energy shooting into the surroundings. The place that the Yin fiend was at was the densest place of sword energy fragments, and the place most severely affected. In that instant, hundreds of sword energy fragments bombed the Yin fiend's body. Pew pew pew. Countless ripples appeared on the Yin fiend's inky black body, the Yin fiend's body shuddered. A stream of blood came out of the corner of Zhuomo's mouth. When he had reversed the flow of his Ling power, he had injured his channels. However, his eyes were excited. This 7 whirlpools, it was definitely the strongest 7 whirlpools he had ever done. So there were times where the breaking of a sword move could increase its power. He seemed to understand something. The harm the second round of 7 whirlpools was great to the Yin fiend. It could be seen from the stability of its body. Before, its compressed body had been like a ball of sticky ink, floating steadily in the yar. After enduring a storm of countless sword energy fragments, its inky body seemed to show signs of instability. Occasionally, a Yin energy drop would drip down from its body like ink. However, before the droplet landed on the flow, the Yin energy would dissipate in the air. The Yin fiend was completely infuriated this time. Zhuo could clearly feel its anger, the anger passed on by its consciousness. At this moment, a little ball of inky Yin energy left the body of the Yin fiend. What surprised Zhuo was that this little ball of Yin energy did not dissipate in the air after it separated. Suddenly, Zhuo's heart jumped. He could feel the consciousness of the Yin fiend was burrowing into this little ball of Yin energy. Yin splinter. Thinking about the great power of the previous Yin splinters, and looking at the inky black ball of Yin energy, if the Yin splinter was made from such dense Yin energy, the power. Zhuo shuddered in fear. What should he use? Li water burning heavens? Or seal soldiers? Or Yin fire bead? Yin fire bead. Zhuo suddenly thought that he had been thinking about using the Yin energy of the Yin bead to create a Yin splinter. Hadn't he been just having a headache over the Yin energy of the Yin bead being too dense and hard to control with his consciousness? He stared at the thick Yin energy ball that was floating in front of the Yin fiend, concentrating on feeling the transformation it was undergoing. Zhuo suddenly had a feeling. The Yin fiend in front of him was the best teacher, teaching him how to use the Yin energy and consciousness to make a Yin splinter step by step. He took out a Yin bead, copied the Yin fiend and started to slowly feed his consciousness into the Yin bead. Watching from the side, Pu Yao was stunned as he gaped at Suemo. Chapter 117. What happened? Even though it was the first time he was using his consciousness in this way, but Suemo's spiritual control was much stronger than this Yin fiend. He hadn't processed all those materials for nothing. His spirit was much stronger than the Yin fiend in the first place, and his control was the same. It was just that he hadn't know how to use it. Seeing how the Yin fiend in front of him was using its consciousness, Suemo felt that the paper on the window easily broke. One burst of consciousness, shaped like a needle, burrowed into the Yin bead. But the Yin energy inside the Yin bead was too dense. This bit of consciousness was too weak. Suemo wasn't someone that stuck to rote. He quickly separated a few more strands of consciousness and merged them together before it was just able to enter the Yin bead. Once his consciousness entered the Yin bead, Suemo immediately felt an astounding change. He seemed to be situated in a grey world. Dense Yin energy was floating all around him, cold and strange. Suemo's mind became blurred. Only when he felt the hardness coming from his feet did he suddenly wake. The consciousness that had entered the Yin bead had come from him. The feelings that it transferred back had conflicted with his own consciousness, and created this momentary daze suddenly. It was complicated to describe, but it was only the flick of a finger. A inky black Yin splinter appeared in front of the Yin fiend. As the Yin splinter also formed, Suemo felt a terrifying presence and became wary. Luckily, his own Yin splinter had formed at the same time. It was strange, but the Yin fiend still kept its original shape. However, it turned from grey to crystal clear without any imperfections. Even though he had copied everything the Yin fiend had done, but Suemo still was not very confident. He emboldened his heart and threw out this clear crystal bead. The Yin fiend sent out the Yin splinter at the exact same time. The inky black Yin splinter moved, and howls started. It was like the crying of infants, the Yin energy rippling. Seeing such a strong presence, Suemo became even less confident. His right hand holding the water drop sword, he forced himself to remain calm. He decided, the moment it turned bad, he would definitely use Li water burning heavens even if it meant he would be wounded. He had already been injured before when he had reverse channeled his Ling power. If he did Li water burning heavens, his injuries would worsen, but he didn't have any better choices. Only now did he realize that what he trusted the most was Li water burning heavens. Pu Yao had spoke of the grand power of the Yin fire bead, but he had never used it before, and he had almost failed in the process of making the Yin bead. Suemo didn't know if its power would be weakened due to that. He had personally experienced the power of the seal soldier, and it was a good thing, but it took time to recite the spell for this thing, and to cast a spell. If he met an emergency, he wouldn't have the time to use it. There was only Li water burning heavens. As long as he had the water drop sword, he could cast it at any time. He couldn't help but grimace. It was not hard to cast Li water burning heavens, but it was limited by his cultivation. If he was the least bit uncareful, he could be wounded. He decided that after he returned, he would definitely study some more life-saving moves. Readying himself, Suemo threw all his thoughts to the back of his mind, all of his attention fixed on the inky black Yin splinter. The clear crystal bead soundlessly drew the most normal projectile curve. There was no sound, no presence. The presence of the black Yin splinter was astounding. All the Yin energy in the surroundings seemed to be attracted, a cold wind blowing, causing Suemo's clothes to flap. It also cooled down Suemo's heart. The howls that came from every direction, the dark and coldness that entered from every pore. If it was a person with a weaker mental state, they probably wouldn't even have the thought of fighting under this presence. In the corner, Pu Yao watched, stunned, as the bead and splinter hit. Poof! There wasn't the imagined explosion. There was no light. There was only a clear sound like a bubble popping. But with this clear sound, the ever-present howls instantly stopped. That bone-aching dark cold suddenly dissipated. Holding the water-drop sword, already prepared to fight for his life, Mo was stunned in his spot. After the hit, the crystal bead had turned into a clear ball of light, and that astoundingly powerful black Yin splinter had actually been melted by this clear light, disappearing in the blink of an eye. The still glowing ball headed for the Yin fiend. It was like the Yin fiend was paralyzed, not moving as it allowed the ball of light to hit its body. The Yin fiend didn't make a sound as it was hit. It quickly melted and disappeared like a snowman, along with the ball of light. There was nothing remaining. The instant the ball of light disappeared, Mo's mind blanked. After a while, Mo focused as he looked dumbly at the empty ground. What had happened? The instant the ball of light and the Yin fiend had disappeared at the same time, Pu Yao's pupil had suddenly shrunk from behind Mo, but it quickly recovered. What is this? Mo turned around and stammered a question. He had thought of many different results, but what happened had definitely not been one of them. Pu Yao said disdainfully, blind cat bumping into a dead mouse. Mo definitely wouldn't accept such an irresponsible explanation from Pu Yao. He took out another Yin bead, added a bit of consciousness to it. After the Yin bead became a crystal bead again, he threw it out. Poof! The crystal bead hit the ground, a light flashed, and then it disappeared, not even leaving a hole on the ground. Other than his mind blanking for an instantly, there was no response. Mo was dumbstruck. Ha! Pu Yao roared with laughter. Was it really just luck? Mo didn't believe it. Or did this thing only have an effect against Yin fiends? We finally managed to encounter a somewhat good Yin fiend and you got rid of it. Pu Yao seemed to be disinterested and threw out a few jingsha. Mo felt the scene in front of his eyes flash and they were back in the stone room. After returning, Pu Yao went back into the sea of consciousness. He sat down again on the gravestone and closed his eye. Mo felt that this guy was probably full and was now digesting it all. Only after returning to the familiar stone room did Mo feel the heavy exhaustion. He had spent a whole day with his mind on high alert, especially when he had encountered the last few Yin fiends. He had spent a lot of energy. Not caring that the ground was cold and wet, he fell asleep on the rock. Don't forget. Even in death, you must not forget. As Mo dreamed, a warm green light rose at his chest, turning into a thin stream and spread into his limbs and organs. Pu Yao sat on the gravestone, coldly staring at the faraway space. The sword test conference was full of excitement. Young experts that lit up the eyes of the audience continuously appeared. The special energy that young expert had caused this sword test conference to be full of emotion. Most of the young cultivators were heavy on the offense and light on the defense. A common scene of the sword test conference was flames and light spreading all around. This was just the preliminary sword test conference. More and more young shouja were rushing to get to Dongfu. One by one, unfamiliar and unknown names quickly became familiar. Mo opened his eyes and climbed up from the wet and cold ground. He stretched out his limbs and felt that his strength had recovered. He looked at the surroundings. The stone room was cold and silent. Without him noticing, he had lost his dependence on the Ling vein in the rock room. The vein was now used to make Dan, 1, because it was quite enough and no one would disturb him, and 2, was the Ling spring was a very good place for the water method. He glanced at the Ling Dan in the Ling spring and put the water drop sword into the Ling spring to nurture it. This method didn't produce any visible effects, but it could change the quality of the water drop sword from the ground up. After finishing this, he coiled his legs and sat down, sinking into his thoughts. He had gained a lot from his trip to the sword cave. How to use the formation discs, the effects of each formation disc, stealing how to use the Yin splinter from the Yin fiends. Even though he didn't really understand the result of what he had copied using the Yin bead, but he knew that it worked. It was just that he didn't understand it. Other than that, his biggest discovery was that he found he was lacking life-saving measures. The coordination of low-level moves could have power, but the premise was that it required preparations for many situations. If he suddenly encountered danger, he basically had no time to consider how to group together those spells. Other than that, the seal soldier could only be used once and it took a long time for it to activate. That meant it was fated not to be useful in emergencies. The only thing he could rely upon was the water drop sword. However, just relying on the water drop sword, he was not secure. A true sword shio would have absolute confidence in their flying sword and sword scripture, like Wei Xing Xixiao. But this definitely did not include Zuo. He never thought of himself as a pure sword shio and had no basis for such self-confidence. His gaze landed on the Yin fire bead. He had endured great hardship and trouble the last time when he made the Yin fire bead. He naturally didn't bear to use up the one Yin fire bead that he had gone to great trouble to make. He had never been clear about the power of the Yin fire bead. After he had processed so many materials in Dong Fu, his control of the stalagmite fire had gone up a level. Adding on the aid of the fire formation, he had the confidence to make a finished Yin fire bead. It was just that he hadn't thought about this at all. In this trip to the Sword Cave, after the dangers he had encountered, he deeply felt the importance of life-saving measures. At a crucial time, if he had one or two tricks up his sleeve, it would be a completely different outcome. Zuo went to an unpopulated mountain valley. This pace was more than 100 kilometers from Wukong Mountain. The old trees in the mountain valley reached for the sky, giving him a great covering. The Yin bead had put him in extreme danger. He knew deeply that this item could not be seen and was even more careful. After finding a position to stand, he took out the Yin fire bead. The cloud-like patterns on the bead was extremely beautiful. In the Yin fire bead chapter, there were all kinds of strange and weird ways to use the Yin fire bead. Because he hadn't had the Yin fire bead before, Zuo hadn't really studied them. This time, he decided to really take a good look. He quickly picked out a finger spell called Finger Throw. It fulfilled Zuo's demands, simple finger moves, and pretty good power. Alone, he stayed in the mountain valley and practiced Finger Throw. Finger Throw was not complicated. It was constructed out of 5 finger motions. However, the Ling power manipulations related to it was slightly complex. Thankfully, even though Zuo's cultivation was limited, but his control of Ling power was extremely outstanding. The degree of difficulty was just a minor problem for him. After 2 hours, he had pretty much grasped the finger throw. 4 hours later, he was extremely familiar. Feeling that it was enough, he stopped his practice. He was extremely curious, using the finger throw to cast the Yin fire bead, what would the power be? Chapter 118 Between happiness and grief. The Yin fire bead flew forward from Zuo's hand, turning into a milky white thread of fire, and hit a broad tree that would need 7 or 8 people to circle it. The milky white flame spread on the ancient tree at an astounding speed. In a few seconds, the milky white flame had covered the entire tree, not even leaving behind a leaf. The tree, which had been bursting with vitality just seconds ago, was now lifeless. As the milky white flame passed, the green leaves instantly turned a chilling white. Quickly, the entire tree was white, and not a bit of green to be seen. The white old tree spread a pressuring chill. Snowflakes started to stir up around the surroundings. The white leaves started to break off from the tip, like it was being weathered, falling down. A burst of wind blew, the snowflakes danced, and countless white fragments left the old tree, carried by the wind. The enormous ancient tree, in front of Zuo, turned to a cloud of white dust and disappeared in the wind. Zuo was deeply shocked by what happened in front of him. Returning to the little yard, his mind was still slightly dazed. The Yin fire bead was astoundingly powerful, as expected. If it had hit a person, Zuo guessed that even those Ningmai Xiuzhe wouldn't be able to block it. For a last resort life-saving measure, the more powerful it was the better. After that, he put all his energy into creating yin fire beads. With the aid of the three-turn fire formation, the process of making yin fire beads was extremely smooth. The yin fire beads that were created this time were different from last time. The entire bead was pure white and flawless, without any trace remaining of the yin bead. However, after Zhuemo processed one yin bead, he needed to meditate to recover. The ling power and mental power used to create it was astounding, no wonder it was a weapon of great destruction. Looking at the 20 yin fire beads in his hands, Zhuemo felt very confident. He occasionally would dream, if he threw these 20 yin fire beads out at once, what would it look like? Having yin fire beads, Zhuemo didn't care about not mastering the yin splinter. Strangely, Pu Yao seemed to have forgotten that he still owed him many yin fiends and didn't urge him to go to the sword cave. Zhuemo was happy to be idle, but before he could enjoy the pleasure from having made the yin fire beads, after he inspected his ling power, his mood instantly dived down a cliff. Damn it! His cultivation actually stopped growing. Why was it like this? The sudden blow was like lightning on a clear day, striking him dumb, his head ringing. After the Mo matrix had been carved, the rate of his cultivation progress had dramatically slowed. He had been worried, but had maintained his calm because his cultivation still had been growing. But if his cultivation stopped growing? He didn't dare to imagine it. After Pu Yao's advice from before, Zhuemo was extremely miserly with each bit of ling power inside his body. This had caused him to be extremely sensitive to ling power changes inside his body. He could find the slightest change. He was only in Juji stage, it was the stage that cultivation should increase the fastest. He had spent large amounts of time every day on practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, in hopes that he could make it up. It was good if he just increased a little bit of ling power. It had been like he imaged before. Due to the Mo matrix, the increase in ling power had been slow, but his cultivation had still been tenaciously growing. However, for 5 continuous days, there hadn't been one iota of change in his ling energy. He had never encountered a situation like this. Zhuemo was nervous like he had never been before. If his ling power stopped growing, his cultivation would forever stop in Juji. Terror spread through his heart. He ran into the sea of consciousness. Pu Yao was sitting on the gravestone with his eyes closed. No matter how Zhuemo called him, he didn't move. He was like a statue. Pu Yao was meditating. It wasn't like he could ask the sect leader and the elders about this. He wouldn't optimistically hope that Second Sherbua and the others, who had become famous in the Yao hunt, wouldn't recognize the Mo matrix. His cultivation paused in the stage of Juji. What about the dream? What would he use to search for the person that changed his features and erased his mind? It was like Zhuemo had been robbed of all his strength, and collapsed on the ground. Ever since he learned his features had been changed and mind erased, he had continuously told himself to search for the answer to his dream, to search for the answer to why his mind and features had been altered. But when the conviction that had pushed him forward had been broken from its foundation, he didn't know what to do. The sky was dark. He was lying on the rooftop, the sound tablet broadcasting beside him. His head was pillowed on his arms as he looked dazedly at the sky. His thoughts had floated far away. How long had it been since he had laid like this? After he had decided to search for answer, the times that he had just laid on the roof to listen to the sound tablet had decreased. Each day was filled with countless scriptures and spells that had to be practiced. Each day, he needed to tell himself repeatedly, he needed to work harder. In the dark night, the stars were like an ocean. Exhausted, Zhuemo was like a child, coiled into a ball, falling deeply asleep with the sound tablet broadcasting. There were no dreams. The next day, the warm sunshine shone on his body. Opening his eyes, Zhuemo felt his body was unspeakably relaxed. The depression of yesterday had been swept away. Thinking of his tragic perspective yesterday, he felt it was humorous. It was fine if his cultivation was not growing. As long as he tried, he would find the root of the problem. Having slept, his body was now filled with energy, filled with motivation. Without Ling power, he still had spiritual power, formations, Ling farming, dan making, and forging. He inspected the Ling power inside his body. As expected, it hadn't changed at all. However, he didn't have a tragic outlook now, but was extremely calm. After coming out of meditation, he slowly pondered and felt that he needed to determine the direction that he would take. After spending a short amount of time, he decided what he would focus on primarily, formations. To him, whose cultivation had stopped growing, the importance of formations had rose to an incomparable height. To solve the problem of the pause in his cultivation, he could not avoid formations. Now that he knew how to make formation discs, he could also use those attacking formation discs. Formations were also great aids to dan making and forging. No matter what road he chose, it would need jingsher. How to make jingsher, it was a problem that Mo could not avoid. His spiritual power was different than his Ling power and its progress hadn't been affected at all, still increasing at a pretty good pace. It was a pity that he had such a treasure but didn't know how to use it. The only uses he knew involving the consciousness was the consciousness stab and Yin splinter. The power of the consciousness stab was too small. The power of the Yin splinter was good but Mo gave up on it. The Yin splinter required pure and dense Yin energy. The only way that Mo could think of was using the Yin bead. However, the Yin bead was too outstanding and would easily bring a disaster down on him. As a life-saving measure, the Yin splinter wasn't as powerful and convenient as the Yin fire bead. Other than that, he could still expect more from Vajra Profound Sutra. Mo decided to find a few spells that Body Shio used to see if he could use something. He might be able to put some brainpower on formations. Last time the Golden Flesh Clothing, coordinated with 30,000 Kati, had managed to stop 2 Yin splinters directly. He could also consider using the medicine seal style. He could make the Ling Dan himself, he could also forge the talismans. As to the paper seals, he wouldn't object to learning seal writing. The more Mo thought and clarified his thoughts, the more excited he got. The heavens would not shut off all roads. Without Ling power, he still had many other paths. Reality proved that when a person was pushed to the edge of the cliff, they could also explode with potential. In the morning, Li Yingfeng opened the store door. Seeing Mo outside the door, she stopped and asked instinctively, "Shitty, why are you here again?" Mo made a sound, not knowing what to say. It looked like Li Yingfeng Shiji had really been frightened by the inky black lotus seed incident from last time. Li Yingfeng instantly realized how inappropriate her words were and added, "Aren't you attending the sword test conference? Shouldn't you be preparing for battle right now?" Mo spread his hands. "Our sect will have to depend on eldest Shixiang. My bit of power isn't enough." Hearing this, Li Yingfeng frowned and said seriously, "Shitty, don't underestimate yourself." Shitty had comprehended sword essence in Juji. This kind of talent, other than eldest Shixiang, no one in the sect can compare. Shitty cannot let yourself go, and not think about improvement. Mo sweated. He knew Shiji was looking out for him but didn't know how to explain. He could only say, "This brother isn't slacking off, but a bit tight on the funds right now." Li Yingfeng's face was shocked. "Where did you spend your jingsher? You earned so much jingsher just recently, you used it all. How did you use it up?" Mo didn't know what to say. He couldn't tell Shiji that there was a bottomless hole hiding away in his consciousness that ate jingsher. Rationally, several thousand pieces of third-grade jingsher was an enormous sum for a Zhuji Shouja. If this was in the past, he wouldn't have even thought of it. Even in Dongfu, it was an shocking sum. Right now, Mo was telling her that he spent all the jingsher. How could Li Yingfeng not be shocked? Jingshi is never enough to spend. Zhuemo deflected as he widened his eyes to stare at his Shiji. Unable to resist Zhuemo's nagging, Li Yingfeng consented to Zhuemo's request to open up for business again. Due to the reputation he had accumulated in the past, once Zhuemo opened, many shouja heard and came. Zhuemo didn't know that he had a small reputation with the production shouja of Dongfu. Especially when he had successfully cut the 4th grade cold mangot, and then the bomb of successfully processing the 4th grade inky black lotus seed. Zhuemo's control of fire had been exaggerated to the extreme. This time, Zhuemo was open to payment through jingshi, talismans, and jade scrolls. Everyone welcomed it, and his business was busy. After a day, Zhuemo didn't look as exhausted as he once would have. He handed a jade scroll to Li Yingfeng. "Shiji, could you help me see how much jingshi for all these materials?" Li Yingfeng took the jade scroll and scanned it quickly. About 50 pieces of 3rd grade jingshi. Shidi, you are interested in formations now. There wasn't anything high grade on the list Zhuemo provided. It was all 1st grade materials. 50 pieces of 3rd grade jingshi, it was enough to fill half of the yard. Li Yingfeng became even more curious how Shidi had spent the thousands pieces of 3rd grade jingshi from last time. And, yes, formations are very interesting. This is 50 pieces of 3rd grade jingshi. Shiji, please help prepare it for me. No problem. Li Yingfeng crisply took the jingshi. She knew the shops in Dongfu almost as well as her palm. It wouldn't take much effort to buy and gather those materials. As to cultivating, Shidi was more talented than her and certainly had his own plans. Chapter 119 Intelligence. Zhuemo opened his eyes as he came out of meditation. He shook his head. There still hadn't been any change in his cultivation. This was the 15th day that his cultivation hadn't moved. Pu Yao was still in meditation and he didn't know when the guy would wake up. He forcefully shook his head, throwing all those thoughts out of his mind. His eyes once again landed in the yard. The yard was the backyard of the store, and naturally couldn't compare to his little yard in the West Wind Valley. The little yard was filled with all kinds of materials, jade stones, gold thread, and jadeite bamboos etc. Most of the materials were all cheap 1st and 2nd grade materials, but the sheer volume was amazing. Zhuemo started to flip through the materials, occasionally summoning the stalagmite fire to process some materials. Sometimes, he would take out a little knife to shape the material into the form required. He would sometimes suddenly stop, and sink into his thoughts. The materials flowed like water through his hands. He carefully placed some of them in the corner, and threw some of them to the ground carelessly. After laboring for 4 hours, when the sound tablet announced the time, he finally woke up from his work. It was time to work and earn jingshi. He reluctantly rose up. Before, he hadn't been interested in formations and felt it hard to learn. Now that he was concentrating on it, he actually found that there were many interesting places. Things like sword scriptures and spells would frequently have places where the descriptions would be lacking, and promoted comprehension. Only formations focused on transformations of yin-yang and the 5 elements. Even though it was incomparably complex, but after careful study, Zhuemo was able to understand the main concepts. Only after Zhuemo left did Li Yingfeng come over to clean up the yard. As she cleaned, she sighed. No wonder Shidi felt he didn't have enough jingshi to spend. Spending like this, how could it be enough? Li Yingfeng was responsible for buying all the materials that Zhuemo needed. She was clear to Zhuemo's daily expenses. Shidi would spend from a minimum of 30 pieces of 3rd grade jingshi, to over 100 3rd grade jingshi on materials every day. This was just because Shidi wanted low-grade materials. If he used middle-grade materials, then the expenses would fly to an intimidating step. She had never heard of anyone who learned formations like this. However, Shidi was a weird person. He didn't learn like other people, and he didn't make Jingshi like other people. Quite a few times, she had wanted to urge Shidi to be more frugal, but when she thought about the Jingshi that Shidi made every day, the words that reached her mouth went away. Shidi only spent 6 hours taking jobs each day. All of his other time was completely spent on the mountain of materials piled up in the yard. She stopped walking, her gaze landing on a formation disc beside her feet. The initial days, formation discs were what Shidi had made the most. However, after that, the number of formation discs that Shidi made decreased. It had been a few days since Shidi had made a formation disc. Why was he making formation discs again? Was he preparing for the sword test conference? Li Yingfeng picked the formation disc up from the ground. Closely examining it, she found that she didn't understand what was written on the disc at all. She laughed. Wei Xing Xixiang and Zhua Mo Xixiang were both genius. How could normal people understand the mind of geniuses? Before Zhua Mo Shidi, Li Yingfeng had never seen formation discs before. She carefully put the formation disc in the corner. After cleaning up Zhua Mo for this many days, she could easily sort out what was useful and what was trash. Zhua Mo's business was average today. Since a few days ago, his business had declined. He knew that it couldn't be avoided. There were only so many shouja that need his services. It was due to the sword test conference that he had earned so much. The people that could exchange and pay valuable goods were not local shouja. Cultivation was piled up with Jingshi. Zhua Mo knew this from a long time ago, but only after studying formations did he truly have an understanding of the phrase. Formations were completely built up with Jingshi. Seeing that his stream of income was not long-lasting, his own studies would probably also pause soon. However, in a short amount of time, it would be his turn to attend the sword test conference. At this time, he was too lazy to care about earning Jingshi. It would wait until after the sword test conference. When Zhua Mo cleaned up for the day, Li Yingfeng handed him a jade scroll. What is this? Zhua Mo asked strangely. The information on a few attendees of the sword test conference. Li Yingfeng saw that Zhua Mo was looking strangely at her and explained, the sect leader left me in charge of the logistics. I have to do something. Oh, and some information about the sword test conference. Oh. Zhua Mo took it and asked, did you send it to eldest Xixiang and Luo Li? Li Yingfeng was angry, the tendons in her forehead jumping. It would have been fine if Zhua Mo hadn't mentioned it, but since he did, she was extremely displeased. After the sect leader put her in charge of logistics, she had especially gathered the informations and given it to Wei Xing Xixiang and Luo Li Xixiang. Wei Xing Xixiang had disappeared without a trance, and Luo Li Xixiang had looked at her in puzzlement and asked, what's the use in this? She had almost died from anger. Seeing Zhua Mo's unconcerned attitude, her displeasure reached a peak and she gave a cold snort, turned and left. Zhua Mo rubbed his head in puzzlement, ignorant of what had set Shiji off. Returning to his room, he took the jade scroll and started to browse through. There was a lot of information inside the jade scroll, especially for those powerful experts. It seemed that Shiji had put a lot of effort. As he read, Zhua Mo started to get interested. Gu Rongping, from Clear Sky Lake, called the strongest among the younger generation of Clear Sky Lake. He might be warm and gentle, but his title of the strongest of Clear Sky Lake was based in his battles. From 2 years ago, he fought sect after sect without one loss. That had created his strongest in Clear Sky Lake title. Clear Sky Lake had beautiful scenery and dense Ling energy. It was much more prosperous than Dongfu, and the sects there outnumbered Dongfu. The title of strongest, it really had some substance to it. Finishing off Gu Rongping's information, Zhua Mo had a feeling that this Gu Rongping would be eldest Xixiang's enemy. As to himself, he didn't have any thought. If it wasn't for the order of the sect leader, he definitely wouldn't attend something like this sword test conference. With that time, he would rather earn Jingshi, Zhua Mo muttered. He kept on reading. Nan Men Yang, Gui Feng etc. None of them were simple people. Zhuemo also saw quite a few that he was familiar with. Dong Fu Hal's Yu Bai, Lingying Sex Changheng, Dong Qi Sword Sex Zong Ming Yen etc. were all included. He even saw a person that he had met a long time ago, Qi Sword Sex Liang Luo. However, the other person, Shi Xiang, who had given him the ice crystal sword was not on the list. Zhuemo's gaze suddenly landed on the picture of one of the people in the jade scroll. The person was wearing a black veiled hat. Wasn't this the person that came to him to cut the cold magnet? So this guy was also attending the competition. He didn't know anyone else on the list. However, when he saw their cultivation level, he was instantly speechless. Ningmai, 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 all Ningmai. All the Xiuzhe that were not local who had passed through the preliminary sword test conference were all Ningmai. Zhuemo didn't have any thoughts of struggling at all. What he was pondering now was surrendering immediately when he was called up. When the warm and harmonious smile of the sect leader flashed through his head, he instantly shook, and cleared his head, brushing away the thought. Being injured was a minor matter. If the sect leader was thinking about GE, then GE wouldn't have good days in the future. Seeing this list that could really be considered grand, he felt, in his sect, only eldest Shixiang had any hope of victory. Even Luoli Shixiang wasn't anything to look at. Luckily, there were no Jindan Xiuzhe. Otherwise, Zhuemo felt his heart couldn't bear it. Following that was the rules for this year's sword test conference. Liang Feng Shiji probably had guessed that the three of them would have been concerned about this, so she had completely listed everything. There wasn't anything unclear in the rules. After the preliminary sword test conference was the true sword test conference. The first 2 rounds were random one-on-one matches, followed by a competition without any rules. At that time, Elder Tian Song Zi would open the Great Pine Pavilion of Dong Fu Hall for all the attendees to enter. Inside Dong Fu Hall's Great Pine Pavilion, any contestant could attack any other person until the other lost the ability to battle. In the end, the last 10 remaining people would become the winners of this competition. To guarantee that there wouldn't be any fatalities among the contestants, there would be 10 or so Jindan judges that would be present the entire time. The ranking of the 10 people would also be decided by the Jindan experts. TSK, even Jindan experts were coming out to be judges. 10 at a time, this would really be spectacular. Zhuemo hadn't understood this sword test conference at all. Such a public rousing, and cost-intensive sword test conference, there wasn't any use. Oh, maybe the elders had their own thoughts. Zhuemo kept on reading and his mind jumped. What was after were the prizes for this sword test conference. Zhuemo's eyes were bright as he looked at the rows of prizes, drooling. 4th grade Pine Green Peak Sword, 4th grade 100 Desolate Lucky Beast Belt, 4th grade Scattered Gold Coronet, 3rd grade Elemental Cloud Water Sleeve, 3rd grade Sky Woven Clothing, 3rd grade Ice Snake Ling Armor. There were 10 high-quality talismans. The order to pick was based on the ranking received in the competition. Only now did Zhuemo understand why so many Xiuzhe had come to Dong Fu to attend the sword test conference. As they said, people die for wealth, birds die for food. He gritted his teeth and thought in fury. When his gaze swept across one of the prizes, countless ripples started in his heart. He was extremely tempted. At this time, he only hated how low his strength was. Without an exception, the first 10 talismans were the finest of the finest. They were even a few ranks above the talismans he had taken from the wastrels of Lingying's sect. For some of the prizes, Zhuemo wanted to sell himself and exchange for the talisman. After greedily looking through the first 10 prizes, Zhuemo gluttonously looked down. There were also 3rd grade talismans in the lower ranks, but were clearly lower in quality than the first 10. Zhuemo had read with great interest. Okay, even if GE wouldn't get one, he could still enjoy looking at them, Zhuemo comforted himself. These few days, he had been sunk in the world of formations, spending great mental effort. Relaxing now, he felt light. Just as he browsed randomly through the prizes and occasionally calculating the prices, as he drooled. Suddenly, when his gaze reached one of the prizes, he first stilled and then suddenly stood up. Chapter 120, An Irresistible Temptation. Zhuo Mo's gaze was fixed on this jade scroll. His eyes did not leave it for even a moment. Elementary formations. In the list of the prizes, it was ranked 56th, as a second-grade prize. The description of this jade scroll was very simple, a jade scroll about the elementary formations, suited for beginners. But what attracted Zhuo Mo's gaze was the two characters that labeled the origins of this jade stick, Kuan Luan. He suddenly became excited. Kuan Luan. This jade scroll was from Kuan Luan. These two words, it was like they had magic, they made Zhuo Mo's heart beat rapidly. It had to be said that the ground under his feet, the sky moon Jia he lived in, even the bigger Jia that the Jindan experts had come from, they all belonged to one name, Kuan Luan. In the heart of any sword show, Kuan Luan was the ultimate existence. It meant strength, it meant domination, it meant ultimate power, it meant the strongest sword show. It was the true master of Kuan Luan realm, and the leader of the cultivation world. There were not many stories about Kuan Luan. For the great majority of Xiuzhi, Kuan Luan was distant and high up, an extremely mysterious place. In reality, when Zhuo Mo first saw the two characters, he had blanked for a little while. For a normal disciple of a little sect in Sky Moon Jia, these two words were too distant and unfamiliar. However, when he managed to react, he could not control his excitement. The bigger the sect, the more the importance they placed on the education of the disciples that had just entered the sect. They would create some jade scrolls for the beginner disciples to study. These beginner jade scrolls would usually be extremely expansive and would contain all kinds of basic spells. Because the beginner scrolls required a specialist to make, the number produced each year was limited. There wouldn't be many left over and there were even fewer that spread out. The beginner jade scrolls of each sect were different. They would be written according to the specialties of the sect. Even in the same sect, as the Xiuzhi responsible for writing them each year was different, there would be different versions. Of course, for small sects like Wukong Sword Sect, there naturally wouldn't be any beginner jade scrolls. There were many new disciples that entered large sect annually, and there was high demand. Since there were many experts, they had the manpower and the wealth to make them. In small sects, the elders would pass on knowledge through speech to their own disciples. The beginner formation jade scroll of Kuan Luan, it was something that Zhuo Mo didn't even dare to dream about. Even though it came out of Kuan Luan, but it was still only a beginner jade scroll, so it was ranked 56th in the prizes. Those that attended the sword test conference were mostly Ningmai Xiuzhi. For them, a beginner's scroll was not of much use, much less a formation's jade scroll. If it was a beginner's sword jade scroll, there probably would be many that would want it. Kuan Luan's sword scripture. The temptation that this jade scroll was to Zhuo Mo was incomparable. Wukong Sword Sect didn't have systematic formation jade scrolls. He had to piece together everything he had learned from bits and pieces. This caused him to feel extremely frustrated and left him stuck frequently. If he had such a jade scroll, he would probably walk into a lot fewer detours. Without even thinking about it, he made a decision, he needed to get this jade scroll. But when he gradually calmed down, he started to ponder the probability of success. In the prizes for this sword test conference, this jade scroll was not attractive. The participants from the list should not have much interest in this jade scroll. But no matter what, if he wanted to get a chance to pick this jade scroll, it was necessary for him to pass through the first two rounds. Thinking about the numerous Ningmai on the list, Zhuo Mo felt a prickle on his head. But if he had to watch as this jade scroll brushed past him, he was not willing. After thinking about it, he made a decision. No matter what, he had to try. This beginner scroll completely turned around the attitudes Mo held towards the sword test conference. He felt he needed to make some preparations. The Shuzha population in Dongfu kept on growing. The preliminary sword test conference had just finished yesterday. After 5 more days, this year's Dongfu sword test conference would finally arrive at the beginning of its peak. Dongfu's order had not been disturbed as the non-local Shuzha came in. With more than 10 jindan present, this place was the most orderly in Dongfu. Do you want one? The match list for the sword test conference that just came out. With this list, don't worry about what to attend. Exclusively selling in-depth information on the fighters of this year's sword test conference. The ranking produced by the composite reviews of countless high experts. Exclusive. Definitely exclusive. It will become your most trusted partner when you make a bet. Mo, walking in the notice altar, felt a bit of interest as he heard the advertisements. He wasn't interested in the match list which had just been announced 2 days ago. But this ranking was slightly interesting. After walking a few more steps, he heard calls again. It was also a power-based ranking, but another version. In a few strides, Mo heard at least 4 versions of the ranking. The price was actually the same, each one a piece of 3rd-grade jingsha. Only later did he realize that the betting houses of Dongfu had all been opened. Not including those who had a habit of gambling, even the normal people would make a few bets just out of interest. If there was demand, there naturally would be supply. Mo had been thinking about studying his opponent, so he bought a copy of every ranking. He took a close look. These rankings did have some substance. The person ranked first was Gu Rongping, the participant that still had not lost up until now. Gu Rongping was placed first on almost all of the rankings, and there seemed to be consensus. Starting from the second person, each version would have different choices. However, in the first 10, some people appeared very frequently. However, what Mo felt strange was that the local fighters rarely appeared in the top 10. Only Yu Bai had appeared in a few of the rankings. The reason they gave was universal. The disciple of Tian Zongzi has a definite local advantage. Mo couldn't help but get angry. What type of trash had made these rankings? Eldest Shixiang was in the 20 and 30s. In his heart, eldest Shixiang might not get first, but he definitely would be in the top 10. Suddenly, he thought about himself. Oh, what would his ranking be? His gaze went down the rankings. Nothing, still nothing, still nothing. When his gaze landed on the last name on the ranking, he saw his own name. At the side, it gave a reason. The only Zhuji Shuzha in this year's sword test conference. Mo first blanked, and then became furious. He looked at another ranking, his name was still at the end. The reason was the same. That wasn't right. Luo Li Shixiang was also in Zhuji. Why did they say he was the only Zhuji participant? Mo felt it was extremely unfair. He quickly scanned the ranking and found Luo Li Shixiang's name. Ningmai. Mo instantly blanked. When did Luo Li Shixiang enter Ningmai? What sort of trash ranking was it? It was all nonsense. Mo decided to not pay attention to these rankings. He had a clear goal for coming out today. In the free market, Fu Jin blanked when he saw Mo, and then enthusiastically came over. Moge, how come you have the time to cove over? Don't you need to attend the sword test conference? Those beady eyes, however, could not disguise the mirth within. Mo saw Fu Jin's expression and said irritably, "What, do you have an opinion?" "No, no." Fu Jin waved his hands, and said fawningly, "Moge, if you come out, even Gu Rongping isn't a match for you. If you want him to break one leg, he wouldn't dare to break the other leg." Okay. Even Mo felt that Fu Jin's words were too fake. One Gu Rongping by himself was more than enough to defeat 10 Mo's. He reached out, "Did you prepare the stuff?" Fu Jin snickered and took out a jade scroll from his bosom, putting it in Zhuo Mo's hand. When your opponent was announced, I started searching. This has all the records of the matches that Chowan has participated in, and some stuff gathered from other avenues. Zhuo Mo was moved. He knew that Fu Jin had put enormous effort on this little jade scroll. Chowan was Zhuo Mo's upcoming opponent. Zhuo Mo had asked Fu Jin to search for all the information on his opponent in the past. Liang Feng Shiji might work hard, but she only had to manage a little shop. In this area, she was not as skilled as a snakehead like Fu Jin. Zhuo Mo shoved a bag at Fu Jin. The moment Fu Jin held it, he knew how much tincture was in the bag. He was not happy at all, and said expressionlessly as he stared at Zhuo Mo, "What is this for?" Zhuo Mo shook his head, "Not for you to pay out. I'm still hoping that you could help me prepare the information for my opponent for the next round." Fu Jin's face finally turned from cloudy to sunny and snickered, "That's great. I've bet quite a little sum on you. Don't let me lose. Oh, then pray for me to win." Zhuo Mo spread his hands. The other was in Ningmai. There was a gigantic gap between the two of them. Even Zhuo Mo didn't have that much confidence in himself. He just wanted to try his best. In reality, he could not overcome the temptation of that Kunlun beginner formation's jade scroll. As the person of the lowest cultivation attending the competition, it was rational that the odds were against him. This was also why his match was the first of the conference. The first match. If he became an embarrassment, it would be a good one. He definitely would not have a good time when he returned. Zhuo Mo had cursed the person who had arranged the matches countless times. Wukong Hull. Yan Li's expression was slightly strange. Little Mo actually got arranged to be the first match. Pei Yuanran laughed, probably Ling Ying's sect. Little Mo really made them lose face last time. It's rational. Shi Fengrong was infuriated, "Rational my ass. Dare to harass my disciple, they don't want to live. The 1,000-flower 100 poison miasma that I just finished making hasn't had a place to experiment yet." The other three instantly felt their heads inflate. They hurriedly stopped Shi Fengrong, who had almost exploded, and comforted her. Don't worry. Little Mo is very slippery, won't really get in trouble." Pei Yuanran comforted, "Even more, it would be good for him to get some experience. As to face, us old people don't care about that." Yan Lu smiled from the side. Shi Fengrong sat angrily on the chair. A cold light flashed through Xian Yan's eyes. "I hadn't thought that Luo Li would enter Ningmai this quickly. It seems like that his fight with Little Mo last time had been of great benefit," Yan Lu said. "Luo Li doesn't lack talent. It was just his mentality that stopped him from progressing. Now that he has been reborn, our sect has another great warrior," Pei Yuanran said, nodding. The joy in his voice was extremely evident. Shi Fengrong looked in the surroundings and her brows furrowed. "Where's Wei Xing?" Chapter 121, Wager in an Empty Patch of Wilderness. Wei Xing and a white-clothed male were facing off. "Who are you? Why are you entering Wukong Mountain? What do you want to do?" Wei Xing said in a heavy voice. His splitting rainbow sword was ready to attack. This person of unknown origins had snuck into Wukong Mountain. He had accidentally discovered him. The other's cultivation was slightly above him. He had just come out of the sword formation. After fighting for a long time and having just broken through into Ningmai, his mentality was at the highest level. His perception was more sensitive than it ever had been. If this was before, he definitely wouldn't have detected the other person. The other was so strong, he was in awe. He had pursued the other for 300 kilometers and had almost lost them a few times. What he had given him an even worse feeling was the other person seemed to have had not used his full power. Wei Xing's personality was courageous. Even though he knew the other was strong, he didn't have any thoughts to retreat. The desire for battle rose in his eyes. I heard that young Master Wei had caused a natural apparition when entering Zhuji, the sword energy reaching to the skies. Seeing you today, you really have lived up to your reputation. After entering the sword cave, young Master seems to have learned a lot. Your sex, Void Sword, finally has been uncovered. It really is auspicious. The white-clothed male's voice was warm and gentle, like a clear spring. Paired with his extremely handsome appearance, he appeared to be a graceful and learned young man, someone that people would have a hard time finding dislike for. Wei Sheng was even more wary. Other than the sex disciple, no one else knew that he had entered the sword cave. This person was so clear about the sword cave. If previously, he hadn't been certain if the other had deliberately snuck into Wukong Mountain, he was now certain that this person had been secretly gathering information about the sect, and had malicious aims. If you are not willing to give your name, there is nothing to say. His tiger-like eyes brightened, and he shouted. The air around him moved, yet there was no wind, and slowly started to circle around him. The splitting rainbow sword appeared his hand, pointed at the white-clad male. The white-clad male found his surroundings darken as though he was situated in a void. An empty and murderous nothingness. An abnormal light flashed through the white-clothed male's eyes as he praised, young Master Wei is as talented as expected. Void Sword will definitely be spectacular in young Master's hands. As he spoke, the figure of the white-clothed male that was standing still slowly faded. When he said the last word, his figure vanished at the same time, only leaving behind his voice. Shock finally came into Wei Sheng's eyes. His consciousness repeatedly scanned the surroundings. There were no traces. The other had left. Under the lock of his sword essence, he had disappeared into thin air. He made a thoughtful sound, stepped on the splitting rainbow sword, turned into a red light and flew in the direction of Wukong's sword sect. When his figure disappeared on the horizon, on the spot the white-clothed male had disappeared, a figure slowly appeared. Is it him? He gazed at the sky as he said to himself. Sky Moon House was the best dwelling in Dongfu. It was halfway up the mountain, constructed on top of a Ling vein. There were 47 suites in total, all with the necessary talismans. The Ling energy inside the rooms was extremely thick. The Xiuzhe that passed through enjoyed resting at this place, but its price was extremely high. 10 pieces of third-grade Jingshi per day. Zuemo might have earned a fair bit each day, but if he had to live in Sky Moon House, he would barely manage to pay the rent for each day, much less any other service. Sky Moon House, which was usually half-filled, was entirely filled today. The rent each day jumped from 10 pieces of third-grade Jingshi to 50 pieces of third-grade Jingshi. Even so, there were no vacancies. All the experts that came from different parts of Sky Moon Jia were living here. The alcohol of Sky Moon House was Old Wang alcohol. The Ling food came from Master Xiao's food pavilion. The Star Pavilion, the gathering place of Sky Moon House, had numerous day stones and broken crystals embedded in the ceiling, creating a roof of stars. In the rooms inside the Star Pavilion, the serene blue ivy climbed all over the place, the blue fluorescence adding hints of mystery. Brother Chow is really lucky. Beside the stone table, a person couldn't help stating. The people's seats were all attendees of the competition. Each person's face was full of envy. Without a doubt, Chowan had been the luckiest in his draw of all of them. Chowan was smug inside, but said, I'm actually envious of everyone else. You can all have a good fight. For me, even if I won, I won't be praised. He came from Fort Chow, cultivated the extremely obscure fiery Polaris hammer, extremely strong and exquisite. Brother Chow is getting an advantage and playing humble. One of the other people smiled and said, ask anyone else here, who doesn't want to switch with Brother Chow. Reputation is intangible, but the prize is real. The people seated all agreed. Chowan could only beg for forgiveness. In the end, only after he promised to pay for the meal did the others stop. In the little pavilion covered with light gauze, the figures of two people could be barely made out from the outside. If the gauze was lifted, anyone would instantly see it was the pick to win the competition, Gu Rongping, and opposite him was a silent person wearing a black gauze veil. I had wanted to find a quiet place. But I didn't expect to see these kind of people, Gu Rongping frowned, and said discontentedly. His eyes landed on the black gauze of the person sitting opposite him, his voice warm as he said, I hadn't thought I would encounter Shimmy here. I had thought it would take another 5 years before seeing Shimmy here. He didn't disguise the heart. No one would have guessed the person wearing the black hat, mysterious and strong Xiuzhe called Su was actually female. Her glowing wrist reached out and picked up the Ling tea in front of her. Gently lifting the corner of the black guaza, the moist and red lips touched the white and glowing porcelain cup. Gu Rongping's eyes instantly turned as hot as fire. Shimmy will even refuse to let me see your visage. Gu Rongping gazed at Su, and said sedately. But the excitement in his tone naturally spilled out. Xixiang's heart has become disordered, Su said gently, the black gauze not rippling at all, if the heart is disordered, where is the heart lake sword? Gu Rongping's eyes flashed angrily. He didn't continue, and suddenly closed his eyes. A while later, he opened them, his eyes clear, Shimmy is correct. After the sword test conference ends, where is Shimmy planning to go? Forge a sword. Oh, surprise came onto Gu Rongping's eyes, Shimmy found some cold magnets. Su's peaceful voice finally showed some emotion, it's already been cut. 4 pieces. Congratulations Shimmy. Gu Rongping's heart was even more fretful. If Shimmy went to forge a sword, she probably won't come out in 5 years. His heart suddenly moved, if this brother hasn't remembered it wrong, if the cold magnet is made into a sword, it has to first be made into a sword billet. But this processing, I've already found someone, Su's voice returned to its usual faintness, no need for Xixiang to worry. At this time, Chao En's table erupted in laughter again. Need to prepare for the match soon. Yes, only Brother Chao can slack off. A Zhuji guy. If Brother Chao uses more than 3 moves, this one will disdain you. Why don't we make a wager? Wager on how many moves it will take Brother Chao to finish. This is good. I bet 3 moves. I wager 1. Okay. Be generous and stop mocking me, Chao En bowed, I just said it. Look, even if I win, I won't get any benefits. The people jeered again. Gu Rongping had just hit a soft nail with Shimmy and was angry. Hearing the crow chat, he was even more furious. A cold light flashed through his eyes. He was young, of extraordinary cultivation, and famed. He was usually favored in the sect. No one usually dared to be so outrageous in front of him. His face was instantly dark. He had just thought of standing up to teach this crowd a lesson when his eyes blurred. At some unknown time, Shimmy had stood up. What did she want to do? I bet 10 moves, behind the light gauze, Su said faintly as she faced Chao En and the others. Her voice was not loud, but easily passed through the light gauze. This light gauze had isolation formations but they were not effective right now. The table instantly became silent. Chao En's face was frighteningly dark. Who, sir, are you? Please give a name, Chao En smiled insincerely as he raised his hands in a greeting. Being slapped in front of his friends, could Chao En tolerate it? Because there were isolation formations on the light gauze, they could only see that there were 2 people inside. However, they could not see or hear their appearance or the content of their words. You do not have to know who I am. Bet, or no bet. Su said, unaffected. Gu Rongping was slightly surprised. Shimmy was cold and indifferent. No one could be more clear about that than he was. She should not be interested in this kind of matter. But she was now wagering for someone else, this. What relationship did Shimmy have with that person? Light rose in Gu Rongping's eyes, his expression was slightly interested. In front of so many people, if he didn't accept this bet, then Chao An's reputation would really sweep the floor. Couldn't defeat a Zhuji with 10 moves. The other was clearly trying to humiliate him. Chao An was extremely angry, but his voice was steady as he said, "Since sire has said it, then this one will accept it." "What to bet?" "Anything," a faint voice came out of the light gauze pavilion. Chao An became even more certain the other was mocking him. A cold smile came out of his face. He took out a jade bottle and opened the stopper. Ling energy and a fragrant medicinal smell instantly spread in the air. The people in the surroundings felt their minds jump. Some that understood Ling Dan became restless. 3rd grade Intense Fire Dan. There are 36 of them. Intense Fire Dan was a Ling Dan that was a specialty of Fort Chao. The fire it contained was extremely domineering. It was a famous fire-type Ling Dan in Sky Moon Jia. An item flew out of the pavilion. Chao An's eyes focused and caught it. Dying Flowing Moon, 3rd grade. The people seated couldn't keep still, and stood up, each one stretching their necks to look at the crystal bottle in Chao An's hands. The crystal bottle was clear and flawless. The bottle itself was not cheap. Inside the crystal bottle, there was a fingernail-sized ball of faint misty fluid. Dying Flowing Moon. Supposedly, every 10 years, there would be an extremely bright mid-autumn moon. Dying Flowing Moon was made from the moonlight of that night. It was extremely valuable and rare. Just this little bottle of Dying Flowing Moon, its value far surpassed Chao An's Intense Fire Dan. Chao An's face was black. Chapter 122, Bet Tao Zu'er, Yan Mingzi, and Hu Shan were walking on the streets of Dongfu. They liked being in busy places, and right now, what place in Sky Moon Jia was more busy than Dongfu? Hu Shan rubbed his hands, and said with an excited expression, "Excellent. I've waited for so long." The stupid preliminary sword test conference finally finished. Only the true competition is worth seeing. Tao Zhuer's eyes were dazed. Yes. Gu Rongping is too handsome. I think, in Sky Moon Jia, there isn't a man more outstanding than him. I really like him. Hu Shan stared at Tao Zhuer inside for being a fangirl. He suddenly noticed that Yan Mingzi seemed unfocused. "Old Yan, what are you thinking about?" Yan Mingzi raised his head and focused. He gave a grimace. "I'm thinking about making jingshe." "Making jingshe? You're lacking for jingshe right now." "I've got some right now." "Do you want some?" Hu Shan said forthrightly. The three, because they had the same battle experience, became close friends. Yan Mingzi shook his head, "Just bought a new flying sword. I've nearly spent all my jingshe." "No rush, I can slowly make more. I'll find you if I really can't find a way." "Oh, you bought a new flying sword? Quick, let us see," said Tao Zhuer, as she was instantly interested in the new sword. Yan Mingzi took out a dark blue flying sword. The sword's name is Deep Ocean, it's 3rd grade. Hu Shan looked and then shook his head. "It can't compare to your previous water drop sword. You're just wasting words." Yan Mingzi rolled his eyes in exasperation. Hu Shan's words stirred up the three's hurt. Seeing the situation, Tao Zhuer quickly changed the topic. "So what way did you think of making jingshe?" Of the three, Yan Mingzi was of average power but the best at business. As expected, this question was Yan Mingzi's true love. He came the focus of attention. "Of course, it is the sword test conference." "Sword test conference? How do you make jingshe from that?" Hu Shan asked strangely. Yan Mingzi patiently explained, "We can't meddle in other business, but if we have spare money, and make a small bet, it wouldn't be bad." Hu Shan instantly became disinterested, and said scornfully, "You mean gambling? That's not interesting." Tao Zhu'er was actually interested. Old Yen, don't pay attention to him. Tell me more. Yan Mingzi became even more excited. Gambling naturally is not anything good. But the sword test conference is different from other gambling. How so? There might be luck in this sword test conference, but the true determinant is power. There are patterns that can be found in this. A person's strength, in a short period of time, wouldn't change very much. Considering the conflict between different spells, the quality of the talismans, even though it is impossible to accurately decide the result of the match, but one can determine the general direction. Hu Shan laughed, then how will you know other people's strength? And their talismans? Yan Mingzi nodded, this is the crux of the problem. It is very hard to determine power, but the non-local competitors have already fought a few times, and general guesses can be made. As to talismans, he said proudly, in this area, I have some experience. That's true. Old Yen, you're always good at picking talismans, said Hu Shan. He admired Yan Mingzi very much on this skill. Hugh, Yan Mingzi said smugly, there are many kinds of wagers. Like the first match that's been spread around so much, Swa Mo versus Chowan. What's there to gamble there? Of course Chowan wins. Hu Shan said unconcernedly, the scalping zombie might be strong, but his cultivation is just that. He definitely cannot win over Ningmai experts. Exactly. Yan Mingzi agreed, but his direction changed, but right now, what spread the most is this wager. Everyone is betting how many moves that Swa Mo can take from Chowan. This bet works. Hu Shan gaped. The odds for 3 moves and under are pretty normal. After 3 moves, the odds explode, Yan Mingzi said. Did you bet? Hu Shan asked. Oh, I put down for 7 moves, Yan Mingzi said smugly, the odds are 1 to 16. You feel he can endure 7 of Chao En's moves? Hu Shan's face was full of shock, Chao En isn't some little character. He's the strongest disciple of Fort Chao. You have too much confidence in the scalping zombie. Yan Mingzi said in a deep voice, how do you think Chao En compares to Changheng Shixiao? Naturally he cannot compare. Hu Shan didn't need to think before saying unhesitatingly, Changheng Shixiao is very strong. Before, when he was in Juji, he had defeated people in Ningmai. Yan Mingzi was slightly shocked at the last part, how come I didn't know this? Hu Shan unconsciously lowered his voice, not many people know this. Shixiang's blood spider sword was obtained by killing someone. That's why he was punished by the sect leader. The other 2 instantly felt fearful shock. It seems my Jingshi won't be wasted, Yan Ming spoke. The first thing Yan Mingzi thought about was his Jingshi. He smiled and said, originally, the betting shouldn't be this popular. However, Chowan was confronted with a wager. The other wagered a bottle of Dying Flowing Moon for Swa Mo to make it through 10 moves. That was what stirred everything up. Dying Flowing Moon, Hu Shan's expression was dazed as he muttered, that's such a waste. Tao Zhu'er, who hadn't spoke, suddenly asked, what's the odds for Swa Mo to win? Yan Mingzi jerked. About 1 to 300, he looked in shock at Tao Zhu'er. You want to bet he'll win? That's not possible. Why not? Tao Zhu'er said unconcernedly, in any case, I'll just wager a few Jingshi. It will be an amusement. If Changheng Shixiang was in Juji and could be defeated, her words suddenly stopped, her eyes were focused. The other 2 people saw she didn't continue and found it strange. When they saw her frozen expression and dazed eyes, they couldn't help but follow her gaze. Then the 2 also froze. A person was walking towards them. Li Yingfeng looked at her Shidi who was in the yard and shook her head. It hadn't been anything important when Shidi had been arranged to fight first. She had felt that the sect leader had wanted Swa Mo to gain some experience. But the bet about how long Swa Mo could stay in the fight had suddenly spread everywhere. A person of unknown origins had publicly threw out a bottle of Dying Flowing Moon, wagering that Shitty could make it through 10 of Chao En's moves. It instantly caused a furor. Originally, no one had been interested in the match. But now, this match had become the most talked out and attractive match. Wasn't that putting Shitty onto a fire to roast? Shitty had shut himself in the yard the past few days, and was working on something she didn't know. She was extremely worried. Shitty should be practicing the sword some more, honing himself before the fight, even if it wasn't effective, at least it would look good. In the time that Shitty had stayed at the store, she had never seen him practice the sword. Did he think he could win with those useless low-grade formations? She naturally was not opposed to Shitty studying formations, but formations were more likely used in dan-making and forging. They were not very effective in fighting. At this time, he shouldn't be working on formations. Wei Xing traveled on the splitting rainbow as he landed in Dongfu. He had gone back to Wukong Mountain and reported to the sect leader about the white-clothed male before rushing towards Dongfu. Zhuemo was in the first match. If he came late, he would miss Shitty's match. As he entered Dongfu, the bustling crowds on the street was a small surprise to Wei Xing. Differing from Zhuemo, Wei Xing was full of interest towards the sword test conference. A chance to spar with different kinds of experts, it was really rare. Just thinking about it, he felt his blood boil, and his desire for battle rise. He suddenly thought of Zhuemo and couldn't help but smile. With Shitty's lazy personality, he definitely wouldn't be interested in the sword test conference. When he thought about Shitty's unwillingness to compete, and his helplessness against the sect leader's order, he felt it was extremely humorous. Shitty was very talented. It was a pity he was not interested in the sword. If this time, it could force him, it wouldn't be a bad thing. Wei Xing was an exceptionally pure sword xiu. When Zhuemo had been focusing on ling farming in the beginning, he hadn't felt anything. But when Zhuemo's talent in cultivating the sword was revealed, but he was obsessed with other things, Wei Xing felt it was a great pity. Suddenly, he heard words from the surroundings. How many moves did you bet? 3 moves. Zhuji against Ningmai. If he could make it through 3, it will be the max. Oh, I don't know what Wukong sword sect was thinking, sending a little Zhuji guy to embarrass themselves. Yeah. I heard his main focus is dan-making. He shouldn't be coming here. A person argued, it's not certain he'll embarrass himself. Dying Flowing Moon, who has it? A person that has Dying Flowing Moon, would they not have good eyes? From what I see, this Zhuemo definitely has real skill. Real skill? Ha! Even if he has skill, he's only in Zhuji. Wei Xing's expression became very ugly. He barely suppressed the impulse to beat up those people. Along the way, he heard many similar discussions. He strode to the doorway of a casino. Hey, mister, do you want to try out your luck? Dongfu's hottest betting match, wagering how many moves, extremely interesting. Wei Xing prepared to speak when a voice came from behind him. Take out all the jingsha you have right now. Robbery? Wei Xing paused and couldn't help but turn around. The person speaking was a round-faced man. There were 2 males and 1 female standing in front of him. The 3 of them seemed extremely frightened of the round-faced man, seemed to be very timid in front of him. When the round-faced man spoke, the 3 hurriedly took out all the jingsha they had. Wagers Zhuemo wins, the round-faced man said briskly. Yan Mingzi couldn't resist, Chang Shixiang, this Zhuemo. N. The round-faced man glanced at Yan Mingzi. Yan Mingzi's heart jumped and the words that reached his mouth shrunk back. Hu Shan and Tao Zhuer were docilely standing with their heads down at the side. The 2 of them were cursing Yan Mingzi inside. Old Yan, you dumbass. You don't want to live, but don't pull us along. Wei Xing looked with slight surprise at the round-faced man. This was the first he had heard that someone was betting Shitty would win. He noticed the clothing of the three people behind the round-faced man had the symbol of Lingying's sect. Didn't Lingying's sect have a grudge against Shidi? Chang Shixiang. Wei Xing seemed to understand. The worker that was guarding the door looked at the four like he was looking at idiots. Seeing the jingsha in Yan Mingzi's hands, he couldn't help but drool. He cursed inside. This group was really wastrels. If they had that much jingsha, give it to him, don't throw it in the water. Of course, none of it showed on his face. He praised, Sire's eyes are very unique. But he still hesitated, all on Zhua Mo winning. Bet, the round-faced man said. Taking the receipt, the round-faced male turned and left. Yan Mingzi and the others exchanged a look and could only dispiritedly follow behind. Really wastrels. Once the round-faced man left, the worker of the casino seemed to have opened a flood, continuously talking to Wei Sheng, just look. Aren't those people mental? From the time the betting started, no one has bet on Zhua Mo winning. They just aren't thinking of Jingsha as Jingsha. What do you say, a Zhuji defeating a Ningmai, is there anything as hilarious as this? Wastrels, really terrible wastrels, he shook his head, saliva flying. 50 pieces of third-grade Jingsha. Wei Xing smiled and handed over the Jingsha. Great. How many moves are you betting? Look here, this is the odds for each move, bet on Zhua Mo winning. Wei Xing kept on smiling gently. The worker was dumbstruck. Chapter 123 Battle start. Chao An was extremely furious. In this period of time, the wagers on his and Zhua Mo's match had become the hottest topic in Dongfu. Based on what he saw, this was clearly mocking him. At what time was he ever mentioned on the same level as a Zhuji Greenhorn? What waves could a Zhuji Xiuzhe make? He didn't believe it. However, he was not a rash person. That mysterious expert could take out a treasure as dying flowing moon, then it definitely was not a joke. But when he made a search, he wanted to laugh and cry. Zhua Mo actually was a Xiuzhe whose main profession was dan-making. Look at what Chao An had found out in relation to Zhua Mo, Ling plant farmer, golden crow pill, processing. Such a Zhuji person wanted to make it through 10 moves by him, it really was a great joke. Thinking about it, Chao An unconsciously fisted his hands. If Zhua Mo really did block 10 of his moves, then he would become this year's sword test conference, no, the entire Sky Moon Jie's joke. He would become the target of mockery by countless people at a meal. When they mentioned him, they would never say that he was the most talented disciples of Fort Chao, but garbage that couldn't even defeat a Zhuji Greenhorn. He definitely couldn't let himself become a joke. Definitely. 2 balls of fire jumped in Chao An's eyes. What? Li Yingfeng stared dazedly at the Jingsha that Zhua Mo shoved over. You want to bet on you winning? Are you crazy? What Zhua Mo handed over was 300 pieces of third-grade Jingsha. Ha! Shidi has great daring. A forthright laugh suddenly passed into the store from outside. Wei Xing strode in and scanned Zhua Mo. He smiled and said, it seems that Shidi is full of confidence for the fight. I'm not worried anymore. I put all my money on you winning. If you lose, I won't get anything back. Ha! Li Yingfeng looked at Zhua Mo and eldest Xixiang like she was looking at insane people. Were they crazy? Zhua Mo heard Xixiang's words and his heart warmed. Everyone thought that he would lose, only Xixiang believed he would win. He suppressed the movement in his heart and smiled, I've done a lot of work and will give Chao An a surprise. The eyes on that zombie face flashed with a strange light. Ha! Shidi will always give people surprises. I'm looking forward to it. Wei Xing roared with laughter. They were really crazy. Li Yingfeng shook her head as she walked out the door. She'll bet it. In any case, it wasn't her Jingsha. The Dongfu Sword Test Conference finally was going to start. Originally, No one had been interested in the first match, but the wagering had gotten so popular that the number of people that came to watch was astounding. This match where the strength was so unbalanced, the amount of jinxure that was connected to it reached a terrifying number. This had furthered everyone's interest in the match. Anyone that heard about the wagering on how many moves it would take couldn't help but be curious how many moves Wuxia could go through. How many moves? Which one would it be? The sword test conference was called the Dongfu Sword Test Conference. No one had thought that this competition would attract of more than half of the young experts of Sky Moon Jie. It could almost be called the Sky Moon Jie Sword Test Conference. There were some doubts about the sword test conference, and especially about the strength of the local shouja. The non-local shouja had used spectacular performances to prove their strength. But Dongfu's shouja had not fought up until now. This was also why, in all the rankings, the Dongfu shouja didn't rank high. There was a quota of local shouja who did not need to pass through the preliminary sword test conference. Consequently, the Zhuji shouja that appeared in the true competition was a farce in the eyes of many people. As a result, from the start of the competition, the arguments about the sword test conference had not stopped. The unfairness between the local and non-local shouja etc. But the host Tian Songzi had used a very short sentence to shut everyone up. This sword test conference is Dongfu Sword Test Conference. The implicit meaning was that this was us holding a competition for ourselves. It's generous of us to let you attend. Non-local shouja had nothing to say, but their rage hadn't disappeared. Wuxia was the only Zhuji shouja in this sword test conference and became infamous. Many people wanted to see him get embarrassed. The wagering on how many moves it would take was primarily due to the machinations of those people. There's a lot of people. Wuxia looked at the dense crowds in the surroundings and asked heartlessly, Shiji, did you bet the jinxure? Li Yingfeng wanted to turn and leave. Look what time it was, Shidi was still thinking about jinxure. She managed to suppress the impulse to explode and said irritably, I bet it. According to your request, I spread it out. Oh, then I'm not worried. He. Wuxia gave an extremely perverse laugh with an expressionless face. It was extremely strange to see. Heavens! Why did she come out with this weirdo? It was really embarrassing. She was extremely regretful. Why hadn't she just turned and left earlier? Brother Chao, really, your opponent is someone like that? One of Chao An's people said in an exaggerated voice. Chao An's expression was extremely angry, his hands cracking as they became fists. The sect leaders and elders of the various large sects were sitting on a lucky cloud far away. Wukong Sword Sect's Pei Yuan Ran was also one of them. The lucky cloud was extremely large, multiple mu in area. On it, chairs and tables were provided as well as ling fruits and tea. The disciples of each sect were standing heads down at the side. Your sect Wuxia is very interesting. As expected, truly a money grubber. Are all your disciples like this? Ling Yin Sect's sect leader roared with laughter. Their cultivations were all astonishing and they could easily catch what was happening below. Wuxia and Li Yingfeng's conversation had entered their ears. Shi Feng Rong's eyelid flickered, anger barely hidden. Pei Yuan Ran's expression was as usual. Wuxia's personality is straightforward and whimsical, extremely interesting. Money grubber. Our sect, including me, the sect leader, are all money grubbers. Your sect is very wealthy and do not know the troubles of us poor people. Ha ha. That's right, this one had heard something before. Do not talk about jinxure in front of Ling Ying's sect. Someone couldn't help but say sourly, to us poor people, scrimping and saving is very normal. Ling Ying's sect was so rich it came out of their pores. Many people were jealous. Adding in that they were usually proud and domineering, they didn't have many friendly relationships. Pei Yuan Ran's light words threw Ling Ying's sect on the opposite side of everyone else. The sect leader of Ling Ying's sect was not stupid. Seeing the unfriendly gazes of the people around him, he understood. His expression did not change. He smiled, saying, "Each family has their own problems. The wagering has been pretty hot recently, how many moves it would take. Sect leader Pei should be most familiar with your sect's disciples. How many moves does sect leader Pei think Mo could go through? I had bet 3. He then twisted his mouth and said, "Could sect leader Pei give some insider information? 3 moves shouldn't be a problem, right?" Shi Fengrong's eyelids and eyebrows simultaneously went up. She was about to act and Xian Yen put out a hand to stop her. Hearing this, Pei Yuan Ran pretended to be shocked and said, "Insider information? You don't know. If I remember correctly, the last time Mo went to visit your sect, he had sparred with 5 of your disciples. Did your disciples not report that to you?" "Oh, something like that had happened." At the side, Tian Songzi heard this, and couldn't help but be interested. What was the result? Pei Yuan Ran said regretfully, "Lost to Changheng." Ling Ying's sect's leader's face was horrifically black. He had wanted to take the chance to mock Pei Yuan Ran and the others. He hadn't thought that Pei Yuan Ran would push a fire onto him. No matter the time, there were always people willing to add insult to injury. The leader of Qi Sword sect said, deliberately pretending to be ignorant, "So that means 4 wins and 1 loss. Oh, Changheng had already broken through to Ningmai, how can he fight with a Zhuji? Hearing you guys say this, I'm full of interest in Mo now." Another sect leader opened. It was luck, just luck. Pei Yuan Ran deflected. The leader of Ling Ying's sect was regretful now. But he could not explain that Changheng hadn't broken through to Ningmai at that time. Such an inglorious matter, the more that was said, the more embarrassing it was. He could only swallow the bitterness. Mo walked onto the battlefield. Chowan was waiting for him. Chowan saw Mo sedately swing as he walked onto the field and his expression became even uglier. The longer this guy stood in front of him, the more he would be laughed at. He wanted the elder responsible for judging the match to announce the start of the fight, and he would hammer this damned guy into paste. Since it was the first match, to show its importance, the judge responsible for the fight was a Jindan. His eyes coldly glanced across the two. In his eyes, there was no difference between Ningmai and Zhuji. The warning glance moved past the 2 people who couldn't help but shudder. The anger in Chao An's eyes disappeared, and Mo's swaying body stopped. You can use any move other than Ling Beasts. If someone admits loss, you cannot attack. If someone is unconscious, it is instantly judged a loss, the other cannot continue to attack, Chowan told himself. Be calm, I need to be calm. But he kept on feeling the dense crowds of spectators were all looking at him with ridicule in their eyes like they were looking at a clown. Facing the judge, he didn't dare to make any moves. He lowered his head, suppressing the anger that had accumulated in his chest. The judge finally finished announcing the rules, both of his hands making a cut down, battle start. Chowan raised his head, his eyes filled with a stormy fury. He was like an infuriated lion, terrifying. The intense fire hammer in his hand turned with a boom into a ball of fire the size of a house and floated beside his body. The deep red flame spit and spat on the outside of the ball of fire. The heat that the fireball released could be clearly felt by spectators 100 zhang away. Chowan seemed minuscule compared to the fireball beside him. The light of the flickering fire reflected on Chao An's face. His face was full of murderous intent. Taking the chance, Mo's hand flipped and threw out a jade disc. Those with keen eyes instantly recognized it as a formation disc. Once the formation disc was thrown out, it turned to several streams of light and disappeared into the air. Many of the spectators either gave a disdainful expression or a disappointed one. Just a second-grade path confusion formation. What effect could it have on a Ningmai Shouja? Feeling the anger boiling in his chest, seeing the other's poor performance, Chowan looked on with ridicule and disdain and deep anger. Just this kind of person, he could make it through 10 of his moves. Chapter 124 Multiple Shadows and Intense Fire. A second-grade path confusion formation posed no risk to Chowan, who was in the stage of Ningmai. Poof! Like a bubble bursting, the light sound didn't cause a ripple. The light surrounding Chowan changed slightly. The path confusion formation couldn't even endure the presence of the fireball beside Chowan and was instantly torn to bits. However, in that period of time, in front of Chowan, Swayamo had turned from 1 to 5. Multiple Ghost Shadows Seal. Watching from the side, Yen Mingzi and the others gaped and turned to look at each other. Isn't this Wang Shixiang's medicine seal style? Such a wretched opening move. The core of the medicine seal style. Standing beside the three people was Wang Shixiang. At this time, he was gaping with wide eyes, not knowing what to say. Last time, Swayamo had defeated him. Adding in the fact the wagering had been extra hot in Dongfu, he had great interest about the scalping zombies match, and had especially came to watch. Not just him, nearly all the disciples of Lingying's sect had come out, wanting to personally see the sorry outcome of the scalping zombie. It had always been Lingying's sect running to other sects and bullying other people. To be harassed at their own doors, and losing, Swayamo was the first one. It was an embarrassment. The Lingying sect disciple gritted their teeth, wanting to go up, skin and strip the damn zombie, especially when they saw Swayamo was using Wang Shixiang's medicine seal style. Instantly, the new hate and the old grudges merged. The spectators all shook their heads. Multiple Ghost Shadows Seal was very useful in the battles between low-level Shouja, but facing a person higher than the user like Chowan, this move was not effective. For illusions, one real person. The illusions had to be controlled by the real person. This was why the Multiple Ghost Shadows Seal was not used in higher-level battles. Controlling the illusions meant that one had to split their attention and the difficulty of manipulation would increase. Those illusions were only useful for confusion others but did not do anything else. On the field, 5 Swayamo spread out. Whoa! A light suddenly rose in the eyes of Wang Shixiang. He was the creator of medicine seal style, and the Multiple Ghost Shadows Seal was his trademark opening move. He was way too familiar with this move. But with his eyes, he actually could not detect which of the 5 Swayamo was the real one. The movements of the 5 Swamos were extremely synchronized. They continuously took out formation discs from the 100 treasures pouch at the waist and then furiously threw them into the field. In a second, the formation discs flew like rain into the field. How was it possible? In a second, his expression froze. His mouth slowly dropped further, but he didn't realize it. He couldn't tell, still couldn't tell. Each Swayamo moved just the same as the real one. There was no stiffness, no place that they seemed fake. The other disciples might not understand the difference, but Wang Shixiang, who was so familiar with the Multiple Ghost Shadows Seal, how could he not understand the difficulty involved? The illusions created by the Multiple Ghost Shadows Seal would not move on their own. If they had to move, it must be controlled by the mind. With his skill, he could just control one illusion, and he had to leave the other 3 alone. The one illusion that he could control would definitely not be as realistic and detailed as what was happening now. Controlling 4 illusions at the same time, and could fight with such ease, how terrifying must his consciousness be? Unknowingly, sweat started to flow down his back and silently dripped down. He suddenly had a strong feeling this fight wouldn't peacefully and easily finish. In Sky Moon Jia that was dominated by Sword Xiu, aids like the Multiple Ghost Shadows Seal were things that people ridiculed. But Wang Shixiang, who had a deep knowledge of the Multiple Ghost Shadows Seal, was very clear: if the user could accurately control every illusion, the useless Multiple Ghost Shadows Seal would become full of danger. No, it was actually terrifyingly dangerous. When it was impossible to distinguish the illusions using the naked eye, one had to use their consciousness to detect it. However, would the consciousness of a person who could control 4 illusions be weak? If one could not tell the true from the illusions and their spirit was not strong enough, then there was only one way. This fight had attracted countless pairs of eyes, experts gathering around. They may not be as familiar with the multiple ghost shadows seal as Wang Shixoing, but their understanding of battle helped them see some clues. The underestimation on many people's faces were swept away. They started to think, if they were facing an opponent who had 5 bodies, real and illusory, how could they deal with it? On the lucky cloud, Tian Songzi saw Zhou Mo's move and couldn't help but praise, "Your sex Zhou Mo is really a good one. I heard you Bai say that he had comprehended sword essence when he was in Lianqi. I hadn't quite believed it, but seeing him now, he really is exceptionally talented." Comprehended sword essence in Lianqi. Once the words were spoken, the sect leaders on the lucky cloud all had shocked expressions. The heavens really loved Wukong's sword sect too much. Having a genius that had an apparition when he entered Juji, and hiding a genius that comprehended sword essence when he was in Lianqi. Other than sighing, they couldn't help but feel admiration and envy. Each of them had their own thoughts. The face of the Lingying sect leader was extremely poor. Comprehended sword essence in Lianqi. Shi Feng Rong, Xin Yen and the others stared at each other, their eyes filled with shock and surprise. They found that they hadn't had a clue at all. "Great, see how I'll sort you out when we get back." The light jumped in Shi Feng Rong's eyes and she burned with anger. Chowan could not distinguish the real Zhou Mo from the fake illusions. In the scriptures that he had practiced in Fort Chao, the spirit was the area that was the least important. Looking at the 5 Zhou Mo thrown formation discs into the field, he felt joy instead of anger. The more Zhou Mo showed he was strong, after he won, the better he would look. In reality, the strength that Zhou Mo was displaying now could be considered the top of Zhuji Xiuzhe. But, what you are facing is a Ningmai Xiuzhe. The distance between you and I is much bigger than you have imagined. Chowan gave a dark smile. It was true. He could not find which Zhou Mo was the real one. But, did he need to know which one was real? All the anger and humiliation that had accumulated in his heart was like molten lava flowing inside his body, burning his body, pain covering his entire body. His body became a strange red color as though he was made from boiling red metal. The specialty of Fort Chao, fiery scripture, had reached its maximum. He wanted to use a method that no one could have any doubts about to win this battle. He wanted everyone to shut their mouths. His legs spread out slightly. Lowering his head, the gigantic fireball that was burning as it floated beside him suddenly bounced towards the sky. The spectators couldn't help but raise their heads, their eyes tightly fixed on the soaring fireball. They all knew what was coming was Chao Ao's full frontal attack. Seriousness came onto Wei Xing's face. He could feel the astounding power contained in that fireball. At his side, Xiao Gua and Li Yingfeng paled. Before, they had thought about the gap in power between the two people, but the confidence that Zhou Mo had displayed had made them feel that the gap was not as big as they thought. But now, they found that the gap was even bigger than they had imagined. In the sky far away, 2 people silently floated in the air and watched the fight. "Shimmy is that confident in Zhou Mo?" Gu Rongping looked at the match and said slowly, "Fort Chao's fiery hammer, strong on the offensive and weak on the defense, but the power isn't bad. If he gets to complete it, even I would have some trouble." Su was floating beside him and said faintly, "We'll know when they finish." Gu Rongping gave a light chuckle, "It seems that Shimmy has a lot of confidence in him." "Oh, then I can have high expectations." Su didn't respond. Yan Mingzi and the others were very nervous right now. Hu Shan directly asked Wang Xixiang, "What's the situation?" Before he finished, Chowan shouted. Boom! His fisted hands suddenly crashed together in front of his chest. As his fists hit each other, the fireball in the sky suddenly exploded, turning into countless fist-sized fireballs, howling as they started falling down. The fire rain hammer of Fiery Hammer. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. From nothingness, from low to high, the howls swept the field like a flood. Even the ground was trembling slightly. The Xiuzhe that had been looking at Chaoan like they were looking like a jade suddenly changed expressions. The light in Wei Sheng's eyes grew as he stared at the field, the tendons in his hand protruding uncontrollably. The sect leaders on the Lucky Cloud didn't have the attention to talk now, their eyes locked on the field. Shi Fenglong's expression changed slightly. Zhuo Mo should not meet this move head-on. A hint of remorse flashed through Pei Yuanran's eyes. His original intention had been for Zhuo Mo to have some experience. He hadn't thought that Zhuo Mo would land in such a dangerous situation. They had only thought that Zhuo Mo had comprehended sword essence when he had been in Zhuji, so they hadn't opposed him when Zhuo Mo went to practice things like ling farming and dan making. If they had known that this guy had comprehended sword essence when he was in Lianqi. If such a good sprout like this one was ruined on his hands, how could he face the ancestral masters? Pei Yuanran's expression couldn't help but change slightly. The faces of the others were also abnormally ugly. A cold light flashed through Xian Yan's eyes. His right hand hidden in his sleeve, at some unknown time, was gripping a little sword. Only the sect leader of Ling Ying's sect had a joyful expression. Just as everyone was intimidated by Chao An's fire rain hammer, and lost their ability to talk, Wang Shixiang suddenly raised his head, the light in his eyes shining, as he couldn't stop himself from shouting, "That's not right." Yan Mingzi and the others were startled awake by Wang Shixiang's shout but didn't have the attention to spare to ask. Their eyes couldn't bear to move aside. At some unknown time, a patch of faint golden mist had rose. Those lights that were like golden sand, under the explosive rain of fire that was like a volcanic explosion, was so weak and inconspicuous. Gold surge formation. The mist that was like golden sand was all pure golden energy. Gold surge formation was a commonly seen gold element formation. It could nurture the vigorous gold energy. These vigorous gold energies didn't have much power. Most of the time, it was activated before casting a gold element spell. It could increase the power of a gold element spell. Did he want to use a gold element spell? The spectators couldn't help but shake their heads. The attributes of gold were vigor, strength and breakage. Along with fire, it could deal the greatest damage out of the 5 elements. But of the gold element spells that a Zhuji could use, they really couldn't think of one that could stop Chao An's fire rain hammer. Some perceptive Xiuzhe that were also knowledgeable in formations found an abnormality. Was this gold surge formation 2nd or 3rd grade? Such a big patch of golden mist, it didn't seem like something a 2nd grade gold surge formation could form. But if it was a 3rd grade gold surge formation, it could not form in such a short amount of time. Seeing the fire hammer in the sky about to land, this patch of golden mist changed again. At this time, no one was concerned with the change in the gold mist. Everyone was closely watching the 5 Zhuo Mo on the field. They wanted to see how Zhuo Mo would respond. That's not correct. Wang Shixiang's expression was frozen as he stared at the field, unconsciously muttering. Without noticing, his face was full of sweat and his eyes were full of deep disbelief. Chapter 125 Final Kill 1, 2, 3, 4. How many formation discs had Zhuo Mo thrown out? Everyone only saw the sky filled with formation discs like rain. Only Wang Shixiang had been silently counting inside. The 5 Zhuo Mo had been furiously throwing formation discs at an astounding rate, but an illusion was just an illusion. The illusions created with a multiple ghost shadows seal below 5th grade were intangible. They were just a ball of light. Therefore, only the formation discs thrown out by the real person were real formation discs. Wang Shixiang, face full of sweat, was full of admiration towards Mo to the point of kneeling. It was rare that the illusions were so realistic, but to have illusions that could throw out formation discs, the person's consciousness was terrifying. Wang Shixiang could not count how many formation discs had been truly thrown out. The rate at which each Mo had been throwing formation discs was different. He couldn't tell which one was the real one. But he knew that Mo had at least thrown out 7 formation discs. The fight had reached its climax, and Wang Shixiang felt that hiding under that expressionless zombie face was an extremely terrifying cunning. The spherical ball of fire that was howling as it came down quickly changed. Hammer metamorphosis. This was an extremely important transformation of the fiery hammer. Almost every move needed to undergo hammer metamorphosis. After the fire turned into a hammer, the power would greatly increase. In normal moves, the time it took to complete the change was extremely short and hard to detect. It was only for powerful moves like Fire Rain Hammer that the metamorphosis of the hammer was clear enough for people to detect. When the howling fireball all turned into the fire hammer, the entire battleground would be flattened. At this moment a change suddenly occurred. 3 blue chains suddenly leapt around the red Chao En's feet, like 3 blue snakes that had been waiting for a long time, and tangled around Chao En. Unable to defend, Chao En was tightly tied. 3rd grade, Dragon Tying Formation. Shocked shouts instantly sounded in the crowd. This change had been too sudden without a hint of warning. However, many people were still shaking their head. Was this what Mo had been doing? The Dragon Tying Formation had been one of the finer formations that Mo had purchased. Not many people recognized it. But in the eyes of these Ningmai, they could roughly detect the power of this Dragon Tying Formation. From what they saw, the power of the Dragon Tying Formation was good, but it was impossible to tie down Chao En with this. It would only take Chao En a few breaths to break free. Crack crack, Wang Shixiang couldn't help but fist his hands. A blush came onto his sweaty face. Only he guessed that Mo's counterattack was starting. Chao En was enraged. Under the eyes of everyone, he had actually been tied down by a Zhuji Xiuzhe. His head rang. The fire inside his chest could not be suppressed. His hair stood on end, his eyes widening angrily, his expression extremely twisted. Go die. All the Ling power in his body furiously headed for the 3 blue chains on his body. A bright red fire appeared on his body, and he truly became a fire person. The deep red fire fiercely burned the blue chains on his body. The blue chains, at a speed visible to the naked eye, dramatically shrunk. The spectators couldn't help but sigh. The difference in power was too great. For Zhuji cultivators, the power of the Dragon Tying Formation was very strong, but it was not enough for a Ningmai. It might have tied Chao En down for a while, but Mo lacked a move that could finish him off. He basically could not do anything to Chao En. Mo couldn't even near the flame that was on Chao En's body. Only Wang Shixiang believed this was the horn of counterattack. There definitely was a change hidden in here. But where was that change? He suddenly found that in that great patch of golden sand, at some unknown time, there was the addition of countless water energies. A ball of faint water mist, carrying countless sparkling golden lights. It was extremely beautiful. Such thick water energy. Such an evident change obviously could not be missed by the spectators. Those that were familiar with formations instantly recognized it as the water-gathering formation. But the water energy that had been gathered far surpassed a second-grade water-gathering formation. Those Xiuzhe that had deeper knowledge of formations instantly reacted. Gold births water. His gold surge formation is aiding the water-gathering formation. It's a chain formation. No. There must have been an earth formation before. Earth aids the gold formation. It's a 3-chain formation. Heavens. 3-chain formation. 3-chain formation. He knows how to do a 3-chain formation. Gasps of shock instantly sounded among the crowd. This was the first time, up until now, that so many people gasped with shock at Suemo. Wang Shixiang silently fisted his hands even more. He didn't feel happy that his guess had been right at this moment. His eyes were full of panic. Faster, faster. The howling fireball rain had just reached Suemo's head. No matter how much assistance and traps he had put down before, he could not dodge this move. A pity for the 3-chain, someone said that, and the surroundings instantly became silent. With Suemo's cultivation, no matter what, they could not stop this fire rain hammer. Suddenly, all 5 Suemo stopped and simultaneously looked at the sky. Suemo's vision instantly darkened. The fireball descended from the sky, carrying an intimidating presence, unable to be dodged. Li Yingfeng and Xiaoguo's faces were bloodless. When the fireball flew closer, that terrifying presence made one unable to find the courage to face it. Shixiang. Xiaoguo's body uncontrollably trembled. Wei Sheng's eyes suddenly lit up. Changheng suddenly straightened his body. Oh. Gu Rongping was slightly surprised, little bit interesting. A light flashed through Suemo's eyes. His eyes were tightly fixed on the nearing fire rain covering the sky. The fireball grew larger in front of his eyes with astounding speed. He didn't move at all. He stood with his face looking at the sky, not moving a sliver. The fireball had a long tail, just like a meteor. But, they were still shaped spherically. It hadn't turned into a hammer. Golden light suddenly rose inside the field. A gigantic formation suddenly appeared. Suemo was at the center of the formation. At the same time, the jade pendant at his waist suddenly lit up. 2 formations, big and small, but completely the same, appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Double chain streaming fire core manipulation. The hands of the 5 Suemo in the field suddenly moved simultaneously. Suemo was under great pressure at the center of the formation. He could feel all the power and changes that were happening in the formation. He had never felt it was so easy before. It was like his hands were greased. He didn't need to especially control it, and those incomparably complex finger motions streamed out of his hands. Opposite the flow of his finger movements, his body clearly was struggling like he was weighed down with something heavy, slightly trembling. Poof 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 poof. The 4 illusions disappeared. At this time, Suemo had no more concentration to control those 4 illusions. He was enduring pressure that he had never endured before. From far away, one could clearly see the tendons in Suemo's forehead bulging like earthworms. Control fire. He was using the most normal method to control fire. Taking advantage of Chaoan being tied up and having weakened his control of the fire rain hammer, before the fireballs could turn to a hammer, taking advantage of the double-chained streaming fire core manipulation formation to increase his control over fire, to resolve this move. Such a smart child. Tian Song Zi praised from the lucky cloud. The faces of the other sect leaders were full of jealousy. At this time, Pei Yuanran and the others did not have time to be smug. They were nervously looking at the battle. All of the spectators were dumbstruck. No one had thought Suemo would use such an incredible method to resolve a move that others thought was far out of his limits. It was just the most common fire. Suemo locked his jaw and told himself repeatedly. His consciousness was reaching into every corner, crawling around the fireballs above his head. The finger motions changed according to the feelings passed on through his consciousness. Even though he had the streaming fire core manipulation formation to help him, even though Chao An's control over the rain of fire was weakened, even though it had not metamorphosed into the hammer, but it still was not something that Suemo could control. However, Suemo didn't want to control it at all. Open! Suemo bellowed. His voice seemed to have come out of his chest, suffocated yet deep. The rain of fire above his head suddenly moved towards 2 sides, revealing a slim crack. The sunlight streamed down through the crack. On the shaded ground, a path of light suddenly appeared. A ruler-straight path of light. At this end of the path was Suemo. At the other end, it was Chowan. And in the middle was that dense water energy that carried dots of gold light. Suddenly, for some unknown reason, when this path of light appeared, everyone that was watching had one thought: the final move. All the setup, all the traps, they followed and intercrossed and were so surprising. After such careful setup for the move, how could it not be the final kill? Suomo's finger movements changed. That ball of water energy in the middle suddenly started to pour with rain. Little art of cloud and rain. Little art of cloud and rain. The people that had been waiting for an ultimate attack were dazed. Though many people hadn't recognized the finger motions and formations that had came up previously, there was no one who did not recognize the little art of cloud and rain that Suemo had just cast. No one noticed that Suemo had cast little art of cloud and rain in such a short amount of time. Everyone's first response was, why was it little art of cloud and rain? Just as everyone was shocked, the water drop sword appeared in Suomo's hands. All the noise of the surroundings completely disappeared. In Suomo's eyes, there was only that ball of cloud and rain. Under his feet was the 5 primary Ling replenishing formation. It had just barely managed to top up the Ling power in his body. Charge! In his heart, Suemo shouted to himself. The water drop sword was tilted downward at his waist. Trotting in little steps, as the wind travel boots lit up, as he brushed past the fire rain beside him, he slowly sped up. All the Ling power in his body were flooding towards the water drop sword. Chowan was very angry, more angry than he had ever been before. Originally, he had hoped to use a grand and explosive move to end this farce, and to prove his power. But everything was ruined. Now, even if he won, this damned zombie's performance was enough for people to talk about. The center of the conversation would be this zombie, and him. The flames on his body became even hotter. The blue chains that had been struggling finally could not endure it anymore and turned to dust. He raised his bright red eyes. There was one voice inside his heart. Die. In front of him, the cloud that was raining seemed to be changing. Immediately after, a figure rushed through the mist. The moment he came out, the white mist turned back to gold. All the water energy had disappeared. When he saw the person that rushed out was Suemo, Chowan had a fierce smile. But when his eyes landed on Suomo's waist, his eyes suddenly widened. The water drop sword that Suemo was holding on his side had turned into a water sword, a gigantic water sword that was 1 zhang long like a flame. When he had passed by the cloud, all of the water energy had been absorbed onto the sword. In the midst of the fire rain, a transparent sword of water. That was Suomo's final and ultimate kill. Li Water Burning Heavens, you're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.